Hello friends, I am Mr. Ghost, and I am here to help you today. I know, you use these videos to fall asleep. So, before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I started this job 3 months ago. I'm the night caretaker in a commercial building downtown. Most floors have offices for lawyers, accountants, and tech startups. During the day, the lobby is busy. At night, it's all mine. I patrol the floors, check the doors, and watch the cameras. It pays better than I expected, and I like the quiet. But people always ask me about the 13th floor. They say the building has a locked 13th floor that no one rents. The elevator buttons go from 12 to... There's no official acknowledgement of a 13th floor, yet on the paperwork I was given, there's a mention of an empty space on the plans. I assumed it was a design choice or some old superstition. Didn't think about it much at first. On my second week, I heard a noise while I was making my rounds. It came from above me. I had checked the 12th floor. It was empty. All offices closed. Then I heard something that sounded like a window sliding open. It was loud and echoed through the stairwell. I looked at my watch. It was a little after 2 in the morning, usually my most boring time. That noise startled me. I went back to the corridor and waited, trying to figure out where it came from. Then I heard it again, like someone sliding a window open and then shutting it fast. Metal scraping on metal. It gave me goosebumps. I took the flashlight out of my belt and headed to the elevator. I pressed. The elevator took me up, but the noise stopped. When I reached the 14th floor, I walked around. Everything was dark, but I checked every window. All were locked. No sign of movement. I didn't see anything strange, so I shrugged it off and went back down. That same night, around 3:30, I heard it again. This time it was louder and followed by a bang like a heavy shutter or panel. I ran to the elevator, ready to check floors 12 and 14 again. But when I stepped inside, the panel where the buttons are usually lit up in an odd way, the lights behind the numbers flickered. For a second, I thought I saw a faint button that said it was there for half a second, then gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but there were only the usual numbers. I pressed. The elevator rose, but halfway up it felt like it slowed down. It made a weird grinding noise, then continued. On the 14th floor, everything was silent except for the low hum of the hallway lights. I tried the stairwell. I walked down to the 12th floor, shining my flashlight on the walls. Nothing. I felt an odd chill, so I checked the windows in the stairwell. All were closed. I walked back to the lobby, a bit uneasy. Over the next few nights, the same noise came back, always around 2 or 3 in the morning. That distinct sliding and slamming of a window or something metallic. I kept trying to locate the source. Each time it felt like it was coming from above. I started thinking it had to be on some hidden level, maybe behind some locked door. It didn't make sense because the building's official floors all seemed normal. I asked the day staff if they knew anything about the 13th floor. They laughed or changed the subject. The janitor who works days told me not to bother. He said the building owners never leased that floor and that I should leave it alone. No one ever gave me a direct reason. They just said it was blocked off during construction. One night, about a month into the job, I decided to take the stairs up from the lobby, floor by floor. I figured I'd see if there was some locked access door. The building has a door to the mechanical floors on 15 and 16, but that's for the AC system. Between 12 and 14, there's a narrow landing with a single locked door that has no lail. I never noticed it before, because it's tucked behind the main stairwell door. It's a dark grey metal door with a heavy chain wrapped around the handle, and a padlock the size of my fist keeping it shut. I tried the handle. It didn't budge. I listened. Silence. So, I went on with my shift. A week later, I heard the noise again, but this time it was followed by footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, like someone walking down a corridor. Then a pause. Then the footsteps would resume. My heart pounded. It was around 2 in the morning again. I took the stairs up to that chained door. This time I stood there longer, pressing my ear against it. I heard a faint creaking noise, like a floorboard under pressure. The chain rattled slightly. I tested the padlock, but it was still secure. My flashlight started flickering. I smacked it with my palm, and the light steadied. Then I felt this weird shift of air, like a breeze through a gap, but the door looked sealed. I stayed a few more seconds, then the footsteps stopped. Later that night, while I sat in the security office watching the camera feeds, a flicker caught my eye on the hallway camera for the 12th floor. It looked like a light turned on for a moment. I switched to the next camera, but everything was dark again. So I took the elevator up, stepped onto the 12th floor, and walked around. The place smelled stale, like dust and old carpet. Nothing unusual. On my way back to the elevator, I thought I heard something overhead. It was a muffled banging sound, then a scraping. I pressed my hand against the ceiling tile. It felt solid. I got back on the elevator, went to the lobby, and tried to shake it off. 2 weeks went by with the same pattern. Always between 1 and 3 in the morning, I'd hear the sliding noise. Sometimes it was slow and drawn out, sometimes sharp and loud. Once, I heard it 3 times in a row. I felt anxious every night waiting for it. My stomach would tighten and I'd get sweaty palms around the time I expected the noise. One night I lost patience and decided to do a thorough search. I started on the 12th floor at around 1 foot. I checked every room. Nothing. Then I moved to the 14th. Same routine. As I walked the hallway, I heard a loud clang from behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight. But there was no one. I waited, listening to my heartbeat in my ears. Another clang closer, then silence. I was breathing hard. I looked at the windows, they were all locked. I checked every door in that hallway. They were locked too. I returned to the elevator, but before I pressed the button for the lobby, something clicked inside the elevator shaft. The elevator car didn't come. I pressed the button again. Nothing. So I took the stairwell. On the way down, I noticed the door on the unmarked landing was slightly ajar. The chain hung loose and the padlock lay on the floor. My chest tightened. I couldn't figure out who unlocked it. I picked up the padlock. It wasn't broken. It was open, as if someone had the key. I shone my flashlight into the gap. A dark hallway stretched beyond the door. It smelled stale. I pushed the door open a little more and it creaked. The hallway beyond looked like a normal corridor at first, but the walls were dull white, chipped in places. The floor was made of old linoleum tiles. I took a few steps inside, testing each step. My ears were on high alert. No footsteps, no voices, just an odd faint hum from somewhere deeper in the hallway. I told myself to turn back, but I kept going. I walked about 20 yards until I reached a corner. The corridor turned left. I looked around it with my flashlight. It continued, but now there were doors on both sides. Plain, unmarked wooden doors. Some had faint scratches near the bottom, like someone had dragged a sharp object across them. The further I went, the more stagnant the air felt. I tasted dust on my tongue. My throat felt dry. I decided to test one of the doors. It turned out to be unlocked. I pushed it open, and my flashlight revealed a small office-like room, empty except for a single metal desk with nothing on it. The walls had marks that looked like scuffs or smudges. In one corner, I saw what looked like claw marks. 5 parallel lines etched into the plaster about 2 feet long. My stomach turned a bit. I stepped closer. The indentations were deep. I ran my fingertips over them. My skin pricked. I backed away, closed the door, and moved further down the hallway. As I went on, the corridor branched off in more directions. It was like a maze. Some hallways had burnt out ceiling lights, so I relied on my flashlight. More doors, more empty rooms, more scratch marks. In some places I saw broken glass on the floor. In others I saw footprints in the dust. They looked human but uneven, like someone was dragging one foot. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I kept going even though every part of me wanted to leave. I needed to see where this would lead. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Then I heard the noise again, that same window slide sound, followed by a loud bang. It came from deeper in the corridor, or maybe above me. I picked up my pace, shining the light on each door I passed. Then the lights overhead started flickering. I froze. The flickering made it seem like the hallway was shifting. My head started pounding. I heard a voice, low and distant, calling out something. At first I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a plea, something like help or plea. My gut clenched. I called out, "Is anyone here?" My voice sounded small. I got no clear answer, just a faint moan. I pushed forward to another door that had a large scratch on it, almost carving the door in half. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. It turned without resistance. Inside was a larger room, maybe a conference room, with a long table in the center. The table was covered in dust and had more scratch marks across its surface. The walls had torn bits of wallpaper. I heard that voice again. It sounded closer. "Let me out," it said, weak and drawn out, but clear enough. My heart pounded. I checked under the table. Nothing. I opened a small closet at the back. Empty. The voice came again from the hallway now. "Let me out." Goosebumps rose on my arms. I followed the sound, stepping back into the corridor. My flashlight caught a flicker at the end of the hall. It looked like a shape moving into another passage. I hurried forward. The stale odor of dust grew stronger. I felt my mouth go dry. The hallway branched again, leading me to an area I didn't recognize. The carpeting changed color from brown to gray. The walls had fewer scuffs here, but the overhead lights were dead, so I relied on my flashlight. Every few seconds I heard that voice almost like a whisper. "Let me out." Each time it sounded a bit more desperate. I found another door that looked different. This one was reinforced with a steel frame. It was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness inside. I listened at the gap. Silence. I pushed it open with my foot, keeping my flashlight up. The smell inside was pungent, like damp paper and mildew. Stacks of old boxes filled the corners. The floor was sticky in places. I swept the beam around the room. More claw marks on the walls. A few broken wooden chairs piled against a corner. As I took a step inside, something behind me scraped against the floor. I spun around, shining my flashlight. Nobody was there, but the door had moved slightly, as if nudged from the outside. I swallowed hard. I felt my heart hammering. My thoughts raced. I wanted to call for backup, but who would I call? The building security code says I am the only caretaker on duty. I inched back into the corridor. My flashlight started flickering again. A low hum filled my ears. It felt like pressure building behind my eyes. The voice came once more, almost in my ear, though no one was there. "Let me out," it said, louder this time. I nearly dropped my flashlight. I forced myself to stay calm. The corridor ahead was darker than before, as if the lights had shut off completely. I could see a faint greenish glow coming from around the next corner, like an emergency light. I took slow steps, ignoring the sweat dripping down my forehead. My pulse throbbed in my temples. When I reached that corner, I noticed a window at the end of the hallway. It was a large window with a rusted metal frame. It was closed and locked, yet I heard that same sliding sound right as I approached it. I watched the window rattle, even though there was no wind. I reached out to touch it. The glass felt ice cold. Suddenly it slid up on its own, then slammed shut with a bang. I stumbled back, gasping for air. My throat felt tight. The voice said, "Let me out again," but I couldn't tell if it came from behind the window or deeper in the corridor. My skin crawled. I looked behind me. The hallway stretched back in a way I couldn't recognize. It looked longer than before, with more doors. I felt trapped in that place. A wave of dizziness hit me. My mind was screaming to leave. I turned around and ran back the way I thought I came. My flashlight beam jumped across the walls, revealing more scratches, some forming deep gouges. My footsteps echoed, and the corridor seemed to curve. I kept going, turning corners, trying to retrace my path. Each time I ended up in a similar hallway with the same scuffed walls. My eyes teared up with panic. I couldn't find the stairwell door. I could feel my chest tighten. My legs shook. Finally, I spotted the chain and padlock on the floor again, near that original metal door. The door was wide open. I lunged for it, tripping on my own feet, nearly slamming into the door frame. I glanced back into the darkness of that corridor. I couldn't see anything moving, but I felt a presence, like something watching me from the gloom. My entire body was tense. I scooped up the padlock, dashed through the doorway, and pulled the door shut behind me with all my strength. It creaked, but closed. I wrapped the chain around the handle, fumbling with the padlock until it clicked. My hands were trembling so badly that it took me a few tries. When it finally locked, I let out a shaky breath and hurried down the stairs. Once I reached the lobby, I went straight to my security desk and sat down. My head pounded. My face was slick with sweat. I tried to get my breathing under control. I stared at the monitors, but all I saw were empty hallways and dark offices. Normal floors with normal closed doors. The phone sat on the desk. I thought about calling the building manager, or maybe the police. But what would I say? There was no crime. There were just impossible rooms and weird noises. My hands kept shaking, so I grabbed a bottle of water from the mini fridge and gulped it down. I took a few deep breaths and tried to steady myself. I decided not to mention it to anyone the next morning. I stayed until my shift ended at 6. I walked outside, saw the sunrise, and felt a rush of relief. Since then, I still hear the window noises at night. Sometimes they're mild, sometimes they're loud. I pretend I don't hear them. I check for floors I can access, but avoid that unmarked door. I still see the chain and lock in place, but every time I pass by, I feel like something on the other side is listening for my steps. Sometimes I hear faint tapping from behind it, like nails on metal. The building manager never mentions anything. No one complains about the 13th floor. No one wants to talk about it. I don't know who or what is in there. I don't know if it's a person or something else. All I know is that I hear it every night, opening and closing a window that shouldn't be there. I hear footsteps on floors that shouldn't exist. And once in a while, I hear a voice that begs to be let out. I do my rounds, collect my paycheck, and try not to think about it. I feel uneasy every time the clock hits 2 in the morning. I brace myself, wait for the familiar sound of metal sliding against metal, and hope that door stays locked. I can't erase those scratches from my memory. They felt too real. I felt the grooves under my fingertips. I can forget how the hallway seemed to stretch forever like a trap. That's the story of the 13th floor in this building. That's my reality now. As the night caretaker, I stick to the floors I know. I stay away from that door. I handle my duties and try to ignore the noises. I don't know if it'll ever stop, but I'm not going back in there alone, no matter what I hear.
If I'm honest, I'm not sure I'd come out again if I did.
So I keep my head down, do my job, and hope that whatever's in there stays locked away. I don't have a better plan. I just know I won't open that door again. I arrived at the house around midday, hoping to find a quiet space to relax. I had rented it online after reading that it was a big old place in a historic district. The stone walls looked sturdy from the outside. The front steps were worn, and the door hinges felt a bit loose when I unlocked it. The inside smelled like old wood, with a faint trace of something damp. The hallway was narrow, with scuffed floorboards that made a dull creak under my shoes. I set my bags down in the living room, which was sparsely furnished with a couch, a small table, and a single lamp. There was a silence that seemed peaceful at first. I walked through the rooms to check everything. The kitchen had an older refrigerator and a narrow window that looked out onto a patch of uncut grass. The walls were a grayish-white color, chipped in spots near the corners. A few cabinets squeaked when I opened them. They were half empty except for a few plates and cups. The hallway led to a short set of stairs. At the top, there were 3 rooms, a bedroom, a spare room, and a bathroom. The bedroom had a large bed with plain sheets and a wooden dresser along one wall. The air felt stale, like the room hadn't been used in a while. After settling in, I noticed a door in the hallway ceiling. It was a pull-down ladder to the attic. I tested the cord, but it seemed stuck, so I left it alone. I figured I might take a look up there later once I got settled. I spent most of the afternoon unpacking my clothes and storing my food in the kitchen. The day was uneventful. I walked around the house, checking the windows and flipping on the lights to see if everything worked. The overhead bulbs flickered but held steady after a few seconds. As evening came, I sat in the living room trying to read a book. The lamp was dim, and the quiet felt heavier. I shrugged it off at first. Old houses sometimes creak, and the wind can slip through cracks in the walls. Around 8, I started hearing a faint noise. It sounded like a low murmur, almost like water rushing through pipes, but then it shifted into something softer, like hushed voices. It stopped whenever I stood still and tried to pinpoint it. I turned off the lamp to see if the sound came from outside, but I heard nothing else. After a few minutes, I tried to ignore it and went upstairs to wash my face and get ready for bed. I turned on the bathroom light and caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror. My hair looked a bit messy from the car ride, and my eyes felt tired. I rinsed my face. When I looked up again, there was some steam on the glass forming what looked like blurred letters. I leaned closer, but the letters vanished. It might have been my breath, or some leftover moisture in the room. I dried my face and went to the bedroom. That first night, I didn't sleep well. Around midnight, the whispers started again. They were distant, like people talking in the next room. But I knew there was nobody else here. My heart rate picked up, and I stayed completely still in bed. The air felt cold on my arms. The voices grew more intense, but I couldn't pick out words. It sounded like multiple people talking at once, each voice overlapping the other. I thought about getting up and turning on the lights, but I was too uneasy to move. After a few minutes, the whispers faded. I stayed awake, listening for them until I eventually drifted off. In the morning, I felt groggy and stiff. I went downstairs to make some coffee. The steps creaked in a way I hadn't noticed before, like the wood was protesting. I opened the kitchen blinds. The day outside looked clear, and the sun made the grass look less dreary. I drank my coffee at the small table, trying to shake off the lingering feeling from the night before. I decided to check out the attic. I grabbed the cord for the pull-down ladder, and this time it came free. The ladder unfolded with a screech. A musty smell washed over me. I climbed up slowly. The attic was cramped, with a single bulb hanging from the rafters. Boxes lined the sides, covered in dust. I saw a small wooden trunk in the corner. It had rusted metal latches, but it wasn't locked. I opened it and found a stack of old letters tied together with a piece of frayed string. Each envelope was yellowed, and the handwriting varied. Some letters looked more recent than others. I skimmed the first one. It was dated around 20 years ago. It mentioned strange noises in the house late at night, coming from the walls. The writer sounded unnerved, describing how they felt watched in the corridors. Another letter was from a different person, talking about hearing faint cries when they were alone. One mentioned that they kept seeing blurred messages on the bathroom mirror. I read a few more and found references to old residents who had supposedly disappeared. The letters suggested these people were still here in some form, trapped in what one writer called echoes of the past. That phrase was repeated in multiple letters, almost like a warning. I felt a chill on my neck as I read. My stomach tightened, and my breath got heavier. It was one thing to hear a few strange noises in an old house, but these letters sounded too familiar. They matched my experience from the night before. I told myself it might be some local folklore. Maybe people like to exaggerate. Still, my hands trembled as I put the letters back. I spent the rest of the morning trying to distract myself. Outside, I took a short walk, looking at the old buildings on the street. A few neighbors passed by, nodding politely. I considered asking them about the house, but felt awkward. I didn't want to seem paranoid. When I returned, the house felt colder than before. I turned up the thermostat and sat on the couch, flipping through a local guidebook. My mind kept drifting back to those letters. Night came again. I made a quick dinner in the kitchen, but had no appetite. I kept glancing at the walls, half expecting to hear something. By 9 o'clock, the whispers began. They were louder than the previous night. My heart pounded and my throat felt dry. I walked to the living room wall and pressed my ear against it. I heard a muffled voice. It sounded like a man's voice, but couldn't make out the words. I checked the other side of the wall. It was the exterior of the house, so there was no other room there. A jolt of fear shot through my chest. The voice continued for a few more seconds, then went silent. I turned on all the lights downstairs. The brightness made me feel a little less tense. I considered leaving, but had paid for the rental, and also felt a strange curiosity. The letters mentioned an old pack. I wondered if it had something to do with the voices. I made a plan to check the attic again the next day to see if there were any other clues. For now, I decided to stay awake longer. Around 11, I sat in the living room with the lamp on. The front door was locked and all the windows were shut. The whispers started again, this time from the ceiling. I heard a soft scraping noise, followed by a slow creaking, like someone was walking around up there. My skin prickled and my pulse raced. I stood up, but my legs felt weak. I called out, "Hello?" but I got no response. The noises stopped. I wondered if I should go up to the attic right then, but I felt my nerves shaking. I chose to wait until daylight. I went upstairs to the bedroom. This time, I left the hallway light on. My reflection in the bathroom mirror still bothered me, so I avoided looking into it. I lay down on the bed, fully dressed, and tried to keep my eyes open. I caught myself nodding off. At some point in the early morning hours, I slipped into a restless sleep. I dreamed of faint figures standing in the hallway, whispering to each other, but I couldn't see their faces. When the morning light came through the window, I woke up with a stiff neck. My mouth felt dry and I had a mild headache. I went to the bathroom. The mirror was fogged up a bit. I saw smears that looked like smudged letters. They might have spelled something, but it was too blurred to read clearly. I wiped the mirror with my hand and the smears disappeared. I felt a rush of anxiety in my chest, but I kept telling myself it was just condensation or something random. I went back to the attic. The air felt heavier up there, as if it hadn't been ventilated in decades. I opened a few more boxes and found old journals. They all had similar stories. Odd sights, voices in empty rooms and messages appearing in mirrors. One journal mentioned an ancient pact made by some of the original occupants. It didn't specify what the pact was, only that it was supposed to keep them together in spirit if they ever left the physical world. The words sounded strange, but there were no details about how it worked or why they would do something like that. I noticed the last entry in one journal mentioned hearing voices call the writer's name when they were alone. I felt a jolt because I hadn't heard anything call my name yet, but I dreaded the thought. I decided to step away from the attic. My hands felt clammy, and my breathing quickened. I put the journals down and climbed back downstairs. The house felt dead silent again, which made me nervous. That silence felt unnatural, almost like something was waiting. In the afternoon, I tried to keep busy by cleaning some of the rooms. I wiped down the kitchen counters, vacuumed the living room rug, and washed a few dishes. The normal activity helped me stay grounded for a while. I listened for any odd noises, but it stayed quiet. Around 4, I noticed the hallway light flickered a bit. I replaced the bulb, but it kept giving off a weak flicker now and then, like the wiring was old. When night fell, I felt my pulse picking up again. I sat on the couch, leaving the overhead light on. The house stayed silent until about 10 o'clock. Then a murmur started. I heard what sounded like a crowd whispering in the distance. My ears buzzed with tension and my stomach twisted. I tried to calm myself by breathing slowly. The voices grew louder, then seemed to circle around me. I heard them shifting from one wall to the next. The temperature felt cooler, and I shivered. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. The voice near the living room wall grew clearer. I heard a phrase that sounded like, "We can't leave." My heart pounded. My throat tightened. I felt tears welling up because the tension was so intense. I wanted to open the front door and run, but my mind told me to hold on. I reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. A new set of whispers started near the top floor, like they were right above me. I placed my foot on the first step, and a heavy sense of dread filled my chest. I forced myself up the stairs one step at a time. My body felt shaky, and my palms were sweaty. I flicked on the hallway light. The door to the bathroom was half open. I heard a slight rustling inside. I reached out and pushed the door open. The mirror was covered in steam, even though I hadn't used hot water. I saw faint marks on the glass. My breath came in short bursts. I leaned in closer, and the marks looked like they formed the words, "Don't break it." I blinked and stepped back. I didn't know what it meant. My hands were trembling. I left the bathroom and stood in the hallway, trying to slow my breathing. A floorboard creaked behind me, but I saw nobody there. I turned on the light in the bedroom and stood at the threshold. The curtains fluttered slightly, even though the window was closed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The voices sounded closer, but they were disjointed, like they were coming from different directions at once. My mind raced with thoughts of the letters and old journal entries. They said the old residents were stuck. They said the voices kept repeating the same warnings. Now, I was hearing them too. I went back downstairs, turned on every light I could find, and sat in the living room. The whispers continued for a while, then subsided around midnight. My body felt weak from the adrenaline. I stayed on the couch with the lights on until dawn. I couldn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint murmurs or felt like something was moving in the next room. When morning finally arrived, I made some coffee and took a long look around the house. My nerves were shot, and I felt drained. I decided I couldn't stay there another night. The letters all talked about how these voices kept going, how they never stopped. I believed it now. Whatever energy was in this house wasn't going to let me have a normal vacation. It fed on isolation and quiet moments. It wanted me to listen to those echoes, to see those messages. I packed my things as fast as I could, shoving clothes and toiletries into my suitcase. My stomach churned and I could feel sweat gathering under my arms. So I double-checked the trunk in the attic and put all the letters back. I didn't want to take anything from that place, not even a piece of paper. I left the attic as I found it and climbed down, making sure the door was firmly shut behind me. On my way out, I paused in the living room. I listened for a moment. The house was silent, but that silence felt thick with possibilities. My heart hammered, half expecting to hear one last whisper. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The fresh air felt like a release. I locked the door behind me and walked to my car. My hands were still shaking as I started the engine. I didn't look back at the house. I left, feeling a mix of relief and leftover anxiety that clung to my chest. I never learned the full story of the missing residents or how that strange pact came about. I didn't want to dig any deeper. All I knew was that the whispers were real and they were persistent. I drove away from that historic district and didn't stop until I was well past the city limits. I can still picture that bathroom mirror with the blurry letters, and I can still feel the press of those whispers. I don't plan on telling anyone else about this experience in detail because I doubt they believe me, but I know what happened and I know I'll never set foot in that house again. I never cared much about old stuff until I inherited this mirror from my grandfather. He was a sailor who sailed around the Cape of Good Hope more times than I can count. He passed it down to me without much explanation. When I first hung it in the hallway outside my bedroom, I thought it was just an antique. I didn't know it came from some remote coastal village where people believed strange spirits lived inside reflective surfaces. I shrugged off those stories at first. Now I'm not so sure. Something is off about this mirror and I can't ignore it anymore. I noticed the first odd thing about a week after I hung it. The hallway is narrow, and I don't spend much time in that space unless I'm walking to my bedroom or the bathroom. One night, around 3 in the morning, I was heading to the bathroom. I was groggy but awake enough to notice something weird. I glanced at the mirror and saw my reflection standing too still. I kept walking, but the reflection seemed to pause for a split second longer than me. It was like it lagged behind. It happened so quickly that I almost thought I imagined it. I remember my heart pounding. My chest felt tight. I stared at the mirror again, but it looked normal a moment later. I told myself I was just tired and half dreaming. The next night I tried to watch my reflection carefully when I walked past, but everything seemed fine. Then a few nights later around the same time I saw it again and my reflection looked like it was half a step behind me. I felt my skin go cold. My back stiffened and I got that sensation in my neck like someone was breathing down it. There wasn't anyone else in the house, but I checked over my shoulder anyway. Empty hallway. The reflection went back to normal as soon as I turned to face the mirror directly. Over the next few days, I tried not to obsess about it. I worked from home at the time, so it was easy to get stuck in my own head. I spent the daytime sitting at my desk, focusing on my computer. I tried to avoid walking by the mirror, but it was impossible unless I wanted to rearrange my entire apartment. By the 3rd or 4th day, I realized I had to do something. I thought about taking it down, but it was my grandfather's piece. He prized it enough to keep it for decades, so I hesitated. Instead, I did some research online about old mirrors. I found stories about haunted antiques, but they all sounded fake. Still, the idea of a mirror having some kind of weird energy started to burrow into my mind. I called my aunt. She is the only other person who knew my grandfather well. She said he bought the mirror in a small fishing village a long time ago. She didn't remember the name of the village but said it was somewhere along a rugged coast. She also mentioned that he got it after his 2nd or 3rd time passing the Cape of Good Hope. She said locals in that area had a legend about sea spirits getting trapped in glass. My aunt laughed it off though, so I didn't push it. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about what my aunt said. I had never believed in ghosts or spirits, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that mirror was different. Around 1 in the morning, I got up for a glass of water. My bedroom door opens onto the hallway, so the mirror is right across from me. I looked at it as soon as I stepped out. My reflection was normal. I exhaled and tried to relax, but then I heard something. It sounded like water sloshing against a boat or maybe waves on a shore. It was faint, but it came from the direction of the mirror. I walked closer until I stood right in front of it. My reflection stared back at me. I listened. My pulse thumped in my ears, but under that, I heard the distant sound of the ocean. It was faint, but clear enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. I didn't move for about a minute, just listening. Then the sound faded. I suddenly felt like I was being watched. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned around, scanning the hallway. Nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection was perfectly normal. I felt my jaw clenching. My breathing was short and quick. I finally forced myself to walk to the kitchen. That night, I barely slept. The next morning I woke up with a headache. My eyes were sore, probably from lack of rest. I decided to look deeper into the place where my grandfather got the mirror. It took me hours of searching random keywords online. Eventually I found a reference to an old legend from a remote fishing village. It mentioned how fishermen believed that spirits of drowned sailors or sea creatures could latch onto reflective surfaces. I read about how travelers sometimes bought mirrors or small glass trinkets, not realizing they carried something with them. The villagers claimed these spirits would follow the owners home, looking for a way to return to the sea. It was all anecdotal, but the details made my stomach churn. The story talked about hearing waves at night and feeling a damp presence around the object. That night, I noticed a thin crust of salt near the edges of the mirror's frame. It wasn't obvious at first. I only saw it because I turned on the brighter overhead light in the hallway. It looked like a whitish residue you might see on a window if sea spray had dried there. I touched it. It felt gritty. I sniffed my fingers and they smelled like salt. I live nowhere near the ocean, and I don't have any reason for salt to appear in my hallway. I also spotted a bit of greenish slime near the top corner. It reminded me of the algae I've seen on pier posts. My throat went dry and my hands trembled a bit. I wiped the residue off with a cloth and threw the cloth in the trash. I felt unsettled and didn't know what to do. I spent the next few hours pacing around my living room. My heart kept pounding as if I were about to face some unknown threat. Around midnight, I heard a low creaking sound from the hallway. It was like someone had pressed lightly against the floorboards. I walked over slowly and saw the mirror. The surface looked darker than usual, even though the overhead light was on. I stepped closer and swear it felt like stepping onto a wet dock. The air around the mirror felt damp. I reached out to touch the frame, and a cold, slick residue coated the wood. I pulled my hand back in shock. My breathing got rough. My chest tightened. I checked my fingers again and saw what looked like wet algae. I wiped it on my pants. Not sure what else to do. That was the moment I decided I had to confront this. I figured I needed to do more research about the village. I found a phone number for a local historian who specialized in maritime folklore. I called him the next day. We spoke briefly, and I mentioned a mirror. I told him about the salt, the algae, and the out-of-sync reflection. He got quiet, then told me about a legend regarding a creature from the depths that had gotten trapped in a mirror centuries ago. According to him, the spirit tries to escape by merging with whoever looks into it. He didn't say it would kill me or anything like that. He said it might just want to get free. But he warned me that these stories usually end with the spirit taking on the form of the mirror's owner. He suggested I get rid of the mirror immediately. I hung up the phone and sat there, my legs shaking violently. I felt a rush of heat in my face and my palms were sweating profusely. I decided to remove the mirror from the wall and store it somewhere else. I walked into the hallway, reached up to unhook it, and the moment I touched it, I felt a sharp chill race through my arm. I dropped to the mirror. It thudded against the wall, then fell to the floor. Amazingly, it didn't crack. I picked it up more carefully and carried it into a small storage closet near the back of the apartment. I set it against the wall, face toward the corner. Then I closed the door. I felt some relief. The hallway felt lighter.
I thought that was the end of it.
That night, I heard the ocean sounds again. This time they were louder and almost echoing in my living room. I walked around checking windows, thinking there might be a busted pipe or some weird neighbor's TV. Nothing. I realized the sound was coming from the storage closet. I stood outside the door, listening to the steady whoosh and crash. My hands shook violently. I pressed my ear to the wood. It felt colder than the rest of the wall. My breath felt shallow, and my heart pounded. I stepped back, worried about what I'd see if I opened it. I decided to open it anyway. I had to know. I swung the door open, turned on the closet light, and stared at the mirror. There was a faint glow on its surface, like moonlight reflecting on dark water. The sound of waves was clearer. I tasted salt in the air. I felt a damp breeze, even though there's no ventilation in there. For a second, I thought I saw movement inside the mirror like a ripple. I froze. My body felt locked in place, but my mind was screaming at me to move. Then, the glow faded. The closet went quiet. The mirror looked like any normal mirror again, except for a bit of salt crust at the bottom. I grabbed a towel and wiped off the salt. My fingers trembled the entire time. Then I closed the door again, walked to the kitchen, and made coffee, even though it was almost midnight. I stayed up in the living room with every light on. My mind raced with questions. I kept thinking of my grandfather. Why did he keep this thing for so long? Had he dealt with the same problem? I wanted to throw the mirror out into the alley, but something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt over trashing something he left me. Maybe it was fear that just dumping it wouldn't fix the situation. Over the next few days, I noticed new patches of salt forming on the mirror's edges. Whenever I checked on it, I wiped them off. Each time, I sensed that ocean smell growing stronger. My reflection started doing that lagging thing more often whenever I dared to peek at the mirror. It was unnerving. My mouth went dry each time. My gut twisted. I started feeling a sense of dread every time night came. I looked into more stories about that village. I found a reference to a ritual some fishermen performed to release a spirit back into the water. It mentioned something about submerging the mirror in seawater at midnight, but I lived too far from the coast. I'm not even sure it would help. The historian I spoke to told me it might be risky to interact with the mirror too closely. He said that if the spirit attaches itself to me, I might experience more intense phenomena like seeing shapes in the reflection or hearing voices. I already felt like I was hearing faint whispers late at night, so that advice came too late. A few nights ago, I tried to record the sounds. I set up my phone in the hallway with a voice recorder app running. Around 2 a.m., I listened back. Sure enough, I caught what sounded like a distant tide. I felt a chill run through me. The next day, I found algae and thin streaks along the hallway floor leading from the closet to the bathroom. It was as if something had dragged seaweed across my apartment. The smell was strong. It reminded me of rotting kelp on a dock. I've started to see something in the reflection when I open the closet. It's like a shape behind me, tall and dark with a slick texture. It never fully forms. It appears for half a second and I jolt away. My stomach tightens. My heart races so fast I can feel it in my ears. I try to calm myself, but it happens almost every time I look now. The shape doesn't match anything in the room. It's not me, and it's not a shadow of any object in the closet. I've been thinking about taking the mirror to a local lake. It's not salt water, but maybe it's enough. Part of me wants to smash it, but I don't know if that would release whatever is inside or trap it here. I keep going back and forth in my head. Each night, the sounds of waves get louder, the salt patches get bigger, and the algae grows back faster. I'm barely sleeping. My eyes burn most of the day. I've taken to walking around the apartment with a bat. Not that I think I can fight a spirit with one, but it makes me feel less helpless. Right now, I'm sitting on my couch with all the lights on, typing this out. I can hear the faint slosh of water against something, and I'm sure it's coming from the closet. I keep glancing at the hallway, half expecting the door to open on its own. My breathing is shallow. My palms are damp. My whole body feels tense. My grandfather's old mirror is in there, probably covered in more salt and algae by now. I don't know what will happen if I leave it there, but if I take it out, I feel like I'm inviting whatever is inside to come closer. I have no clue how this ends. All I know is that the reflection isn't always matching my movements anymore. Sometimes I see a flicker of something else in there, something with dark skin and sharp ridges. I notice the flicker, then it's gone. I keep rubbing my eyes, thinking I might be hallucinating. But when I step into the hallway and approach the closet, the floor feels slightly wet. My feet leave prints on the way back. I don't know if I can handle this much longer, but I also can't just forget about it. I plan to call that historian again tomorrow. Maybe he'll have some practical advice on how to handle this mirror. I'm not going to the ocean anytime soon, but maybe there's another way. I just hope I can sleep tonight without hearing those waves crash behind the closet door. If it gets worse, I might have to do something drastic like burying the mirror somewhere. I'm not sure that would solve the problem. Right now, I just want this presence gone. I can't live with the feeling that something is watching me every time I pass that hallway. That's the story so far. It's all I can tell you. The old mirror my grandfather left me seems to hold the spirit of something lost at sea. It's creeping into my reflection, leaving salt and algae around my apartment, and making me hear waves at night. I'm stuck with this thing until I figure out a way to send it back where it came from, or at least get it out of my life. But I'm afraid of what might happen if I push it too far. I'm afraid that whatever's in there is waiting for me to slip up or look too long to let my guard down. I don't know how this ends, but I know I can't ignore it anymore. The mirror is here, and it's not going away on its own. I saw something that shouldn't have been there. That's how everything started. One early morning on a day that felt like any other, I sat by the train window, staring at the passing buildings. I was tired and didn't care about much besides closing my eyes for a few minutes. Then I noticed a face in the reflection on the glass. It wasn't my face, it looked like an older man's, but the details were blurry. At first I rubbed my eyes and blinked a few times. The face stayed there staring back at me, but when I turned my head to check behind me, no one was there. I felt a chill move through my arms. I told myself it was just some weird reflection or maybe a smudge on the window. I forced myself to ignore it. The next day, I took the same seat. I had a habit of sitting in the same spot, usually a corner seat by the window. I got comfortable, put my bag on my lap, and looked out at the city. After a couple of stops, I glanced at the window. I felt my heart jump, because that face was there again. This time it looked sharper. I could see the forehead, the eyes, and the outline of a mouth. My breath caught in my throat. I tilted my head, thinking maybe my reflection was blending with something behind me. But I was alone in that section of the car. There was no one across from me, or behind me. When I looked at the face again, its mouth twitched. I swear I saw a small, strange grin. A shiver crept up my back. I changed seats. For a few days after that, I tried different cars. Sometimes I sat near the doors. Sometimes I stood. Sometimes I took an entirely different train. One that left 15 minutes earlier. But every single time, usually once we passed the second or third stop, I spotted that face in the window if I looked at my reflection. If there were other people around, they didn't seem to notice anything. Nobody said a word about it. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself it was just a trick of the mind. Then I noticed it moving. It happened one morning when the train was almost empty. I leaned forward trying to tie my shoe. When I looked up at the window, the face was there, but the eyes looked like they were shifting around. I felt my stomach tighten. I looked away and pressed my fingertips against my temples. My breath got faster. I counted to 10, then forced myself to look back. The face still stared at me, but now the mouth seemed curved in a slight smirk. I couldn't stand it. I stood up and walked down the aisle to the door, holding onto the rail. The train rattled and my legs felt weak. I felt sweat on my neck. I waited for the next stop, and got off without even thinking. I ended up being late to work, but I didn't care. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept remembering that face in the window, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt like it was there in my room. I kept turning on the bedside lamp, checking my mirror, checking the reflection in my TV screen. There was nothing there, but I felt uneasy. I got up and made some coffee. I stared at my kitchen window, half expecting to see that face staring at me again. Nothing happened, but I stayed up almost the whole night, unable to relax. In the morning, I dreaded going back on that train. I needed to get to work, so I forced myself to go. I avoided looking at any windows. I stared at my phone, or I stared at the floor, but out of the corner of my eye, I sensed movement in the glass. I knew if I looked, I'd see it, so I kept my eyes down until my stop came. I got off the train in a rush, almost bumping into an older passenger who was standing near the door. My heart pounded the whole way to work. After a few more days of this, I decided I had to figure out what was going on. I asked a few people on the train platform if they'd ever noticed anything strange on the route. Most shrugged and said no. One guy told me that some local rumor mentioned weird sightings in old train cars that were left on a sidetrack. I pressed him for more details, but he didn't know much. He just said a few people claimed to see shapes in the windows of those abandoned cars, especially late at night. He gave me a website link where local train enthusiasts posted stories about the railway's history. I thanked him and then left my mind buzzing. When I got home that evening, I looked up the website. It had forum threads about old train stations, lost railway lines, and abandoned cars. A few people claimed to have seen a spirit or ghostly presence near certain abandoned cars. They posted grainy photos. I didn't see any clear faces in those photos, but some angles looked eerie. One post said that a spirit seemed to travel between cars, not confined to one spot. Another said they saw it in reflections, but it never appeared as a solid figure in front of them. My nerves grew tight. I felt my forehead sweating as I read these posts. I spent hours scrolling and reading every piece of information. A few people wrote about nightmares about feeling watched on empty trains. Some mentioned hearing faint whispers or breathing. I hadn't heard any voices, but the reflection was enough. I posted a message asking if anyone had seen a face in the window while riding a regular passenger train during early morning commutes. Most replies just joked around or called me paranoid. But one person said they saw something similar and recommended that I stop riding that line for a while. They believed the entity could attach itself to specific people. I wasn't sure if that was ridiculous or if I should believe it. I felt a sinking dread in my chest. The next day I tried to drive to work, but my car wouldn't start. That had never happened before. I ended up calling a friend, but he couldn't give me a ride that day. I had no choice but to take the train. I sat in a different part of the car again, trying to keep my head down. Everything was quiet until we reached that same stretch near the tracks where they kept some older unused cars. The train slowed a bit, and the lights flickered. I glanced at the window in front of me, and there it was.
That face.
I clenched my fists and my pulse raced. My jaw tightened. I couldn't breathe normally. It looked more defined than ever, like it was pushing against the window from the inside of the reflection. I could see the eyes shifting around, looking left and right as though checking if anyone else was watching. Then it locked eyes with me. My stomach felt hollow. I thought I was going to throw up. So I looked away and shut my eyes until we pulled into the next station. Over the next few days, I started having nightmares. In these dreams, I would walk into an empty train car late at night. The lights above me would flicker, and I'd look at the window. That face would be there, sometimes smiling wide, sometimes pressing up against the glass from the other side. I'd try to scream, but no sound came out. Then I'd wake up, sweaty, gasping for air. I started leaving my bedroom light on. My hands shook whenever I unlocked my door in the morning. My appetite shrunk. I lost weight. My coworkers asked if I was sick. I told them I wasn't sleeping well. They offered me some advice. Go see a doctor. Try some medication. But I knew none of that would help if I couldn't get rid of this horrible presence. One Saturday I decided to visit the abandoned train yard myself. I drove there in the late afternoon. The sky was overcast, and the place looked deserted. Several old train cars sat on rusted tracks covered in graffiti. I walked around feeling my palms sweat. I forced myself to look in the windows of those old cars. Most of them were filled with junk, broken seats, and scattered trash. The air smelled like rust and stale water. I didn't see anything unusual at first. Then, as I stood near one of the cars, I heard a faint scraping sound from inside. I tried to peer in through a cracked window. My heart pounded so hard that I felt a throb in my neck. The inside was dark, but I could make out a shape in the corner. It was too dark to see details, so I stepped back and found the side door. It was partially open. I pulled it and it creaked. I climbed in, shining a small flashlight I'd brought. The seats were torn, and there was debris on the floor. The scraping sound came again from somewhere near the opposite end of the car. I moved forward, trying not to make noise. I heard my own breathing echo in that silent space. Suddenly, I heard a louder thump. I pointed the flashlight at the window, and I saw a shape in the glass. It moved quickly, slipping out of view. My chest felt tight. I dropped the flashlight for a second, cursing under my breath as it clattered on the floor. I picked it up, aimed it everywhere. Nothing was there. The car was empty, but I felt a presence. It was like something was behind me, breathing softly against my neck. I spun around, shining the light behind me. Still nothing. Then, I heard another scraping sound behind the next row of seats. I backed away, stumbling out of the car. I slammed the door shut and stood outside, panting. That night, the nightmares got worse. I dreamed that face was all around me, in every reflective surface. My bathroom mirror, my phone screen, even the reflection in a dark puddle on the street. When I woke up, I felt exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. I went to wash my face in the sink, and when I looked at the water in the basin, I thought I saw that grin again. I jumped back, almost tripping. My legs were weak. I tried to avoid windows as much as possible. I stopped looking at reflections in store windows or car mirrors, and I avoided eye contact with any reflective surface in the subway. Yet it felt like the face was always there, waiting for me to glance at it. One morning I tried an earlier train, hoping maybe the spirit, or whatever it was, wouldn't show up. At first, everything seemed normal. The car was almost empty, and I stared at my shoes the entire time. But then I felt a shift in the air. The hair on my arm stood up and I heard a strange click behind me. I looked up at the window for just a second, and it was there, looking more solid with deep-set eyes and a faint grin. I jumped out of my seat and walked toward the doors. My heart thudded and I felt sweat dripping from my temples. The train reached the next station and I got off. I stood on the platform breathing hard. I noticed a security guard. I almost told him what was happening, but I realized I had no way to explain this. I started reading more about protective practices. I read how some people tried to ward off strange entities by ignoring them, not giving them energy. So I tried that approach. I stopped reacting even when I saw the face in the window. I forced myself to breathe slowly and stare past it, telling myself it was nothing. My hands still shook and my stomach churned, but I kept this up for a few days. I didn't look away and I didn't run off the train. The face still appeared, sometimes getting so close to my reflection that it looked like it was inches away from me. But I kept my posture firm and tried to block out the fear. One evening, when I was the only passenger in that section of the train, the face appeared again. The train lights flickered, and I heard a soft scratching sound on the window next to my seat. I forced myself to stay still. My mouth felt dry. My pulse hammered in my ears. The face's expression changed. It wasn't exactly a grin this time. It was something else, like a silent challenge. My legs tensed up, ready to run, but I didn't move. The face slowly drifted along the window, almost as if it were gliding. I swallowed hard and my throat felt scratchy. The train pulled into the final stop, and the face faded away from the glass. I stood up on shaky legs and left the car. I still see the face from time to time, usually on that same stretch of track. It's become a part of my daily routine, even though it scares me. Sometimes I notice it in the reflection of glass doors at the station. Sometimes I see it in the side window when I'm walking along the platform at night. I don't have an explanation for it. I've read all sorts of theories, but nothing really fits. I tried talking to a few more people, but most think I'm exaggerating or just tired. A couple hinted that they've felt something odd on that line, but no one describes it the way I do. I don't know if I'm stuck with this forever. I haven't found a solution. I keep my head down most of the time now. My shoulders are always tense, and I jump at the smallest noises. Sometimes I feel like I catch a flicker of that face in the mirrors at work or in the dark window of my living room at night. It never fully goes away. I've learned to live with the fear by pushing it aside, but it's always there in the back of my mind. Every day I board that train, and every day I hope maybe it'll be gone. But when I glance at the window, I see it waiting, staring as if it wants me to know that it's never left. I work as an archivist at an old university. Late one night, I was sorting piles of documents in a cramped storage room. My back hurt from bending over stacks of dusty folders and my eyes felt heavy. I just wanted to wrap up and go home. Then I noticed a faint outline in the far wall. It looked like a small crack that formed a perfect rectangle. I ran my fingers over it and felt a slight draft. That was strange because there were no windows or obvious vents. The air coming through the crack felt cooler than the stale storage room. I pressed on the rectangle and part of the wall shifted. That's when I realized it was a hidden door. I pushed it open, and the hinges squeaked as the door swung inward. Dust floated in the air, and the room beyond smelled like old paper and damp stone. I fumbled for my flashlight. The corridor was narrow with rough walls and a low ceiling. My heart pounded, but curiosity overrode any hesitation. I stepped forward, shining the flashlight around. The corridor led to a set of stone steps descending into darkness. I wondered how long this passage had been here. I'd never heard of any underground levels besides the official basement archives. This wasn't on any blueprint I'd seen. I went down the steps slowly, and my breathing sounded loud in the cramped space. Each footstep echoed. At the bottom I reached a thick wooden door with an old-fashioned lock, but it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my shoulder, and it opened with a scraping noise. The smell of marl rushed out along with something else. It was like the smell of old books left in a damp attic for too long, but sharper. The hair on my arms stood up, and I felt a mild chill on my neck. Inside, I found a massive room filled with shelves, each one stacked from floor to ceiling with dozens of old books. I couldn't see the far end with my small flashlight. My knees felt shaky. I didn't expect something this big under the university. I whispered to myself, "This is insane." Then I noticed that some of the books on the nearest shelf looked in decent shape despite the obvious humidity in the air. The spines were intact, but the covers were coated in dust. I stepped closer to one shelf and aimed my flashlight at a thick volume with a dark cover. Its title wasn't in English. The letters looked foreign, maybe Latin or something older. My hand shook a bit when I reached out to touch it. The cover felt cold and stiff. I tried to open it, but the pages were stuck together at first. Then they loosened with a crackling sound, and I flipped through. The words on the pages looked handwritten in different inks. Some pages were so faded that I could barely see anything. Suddenly the pages started turning on their own. Jerked my hand away. There was no breeze in the room. My flashlight flickered across the paper, and I saw the words shifting. It looked like they were rearranging on the page. I felt a tightness in my chest. I let go of the book and stepped back. My pulse was rapid, my legs felt stiff. I swallowed and tried to keep calm. Maybe I was imagining things. I took a couple of steps away from the shelf, trying to slow my breathing. I panned my flashlight across the rows of shelves. Some books looked older than anything I'd ever handled. There was something unsettling about them. I heard a faint rustling sound like pages turning or dry leaves scraping across stone. I couldn't pinpoint the source, and my scalp began to tighten as my mouth went dry. Then I saw a small wooden desk against the wall with a single chair in front of it. The book lay open on the desk. I walked over and shone my flashlight. The open book had handwritten notes all over the margins. The handwriting looked frantic, with big letters and underlined words. I leaned in to read. The notes were in English, scribbled between lines of text and some other language. One note said, "They move when no one is looking." Another said, "Do not trust the whispers." My stomach felt heavy, and I had a sudden urge to get out. I heard a slight scraping sound behind me and spun around, but nothing was there. My hand trembled, and my flashlight shook. I took a few deep breaths. The air felt thick, and I struggled to clear my mind. I decided to head back to the door. I needed to report this, or at least come back with better lighting. But as I turned to go, I realized I couldn't see the entry door. Instead, I saw more shelves and another passage to the left. I frowned and walked in that direction, certain that was where I'd come from. I found another set of shelves and a brick wall at the end. I went back to the main area and walked in circles trying to spot the stone steps or the wooden door. They were gone. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. My throat felt tight. This made no sense. I spoke out loud, but my voice sounded weak in the large space. "Hello? Is anyone here?" My words echoed slightly. There was no response. I focused on staying calm. I walked along the perimeter of the room, shining my flashlight on the walls. Eventually, I came across a different corridor. The hallway branched into two directions. It was cramped with shelves built into the walls, each loaded with more books. I thought maybe I could find some sign or marker that would lead me back to the exit. I took the left corridor first. My foot kicked something on the floor. It was a small stool with a thick layer of dust. It looked like someone used it to reach higher shelves. I listened carefully. The silence weighed heavily on me. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Then, faintly, I heard a whisper. It sounded like my name, but the voice was distorted. My skin erupted in goosebumps and I felt my chest tighten again. I swung the flashlight around, searching for the source, but saw nothing. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. I rushed ahead, thinking maybe I could find a stairway or a sign of daylight. My footsteps echoed on the stone floor. I passed more shelves, more books, and more dark corners. The corridor twisted and turned. At one point I found myself at a circular reading area with a single table and a lantern on it. The lantern was old, made of metal and glass. I shook it slightly. It had a bit of oil left. I found a striker nearby. My hands shook, but I managed to spark the lantern. A small flame flickered inside it. I turned off my flashlight to save the battery and used the lantern's glow instead. It provided a wider pool of light, but it also cast moving shadows on the walls. That's when I noticed a movement in the corner of my eye. I turned. A tall shelf at the edge of the reading area had a slight sway, as if it had been nudged. The books on it seemed to shift. I froze, holding the lantern at chest level. My arms felt tight. I heard a low scraping sound like something sliding across the floor. My legs tensed up. I took a step back. Then I saw a flicker of movement among the books, but I couldn't tell if it was an insect, an animal, or something else. The shadows made it impossible to see clearly. I stood there waiting. My breath was shallow. Nothing emerged from behind the shelf. I decided to keep moving. The corridors changed shape as I walked. One moment, I was in a narrow hall with stone walls close on both sides. The next moment, I emerged in a larger room with a vaulted ceiling and tall shelves arranged like a maze. I tried to keep track by leaving small piles of dust or bits of paper on the floor as markers, but the path still shifted. Each time I turned around, the environment looked different. My sense of direction fell apart. I realized this place was not normal. It felt controlled by something. The whispers happened more often. Sometimes they sounded right next to my ear, so clear that I turned around expecting to see someone. Other times I heard them far away, like a breath carried by a breeze. Each time, I felt my stomach tighten and my heart rate spike. I wondered if the library itself was alive. I tried not to think about it too hard. I wanted to focus on getting out. I kept telling myself I need to find out why this place was sealed off. That might give me a clue. I remembered the manuscript on the desk with those warning notes. If I could find it again, maybe there would be more details about how to leave. I wandered back through the corridors, scanning for the desk. My lantern started to dim, so I turned it down to preserve the oil. Everything got darker, and my anxiety rose. I touched the wall to guide myself. It felt damp and cold. I heard my name whispered again. This time I shouted, "Stop it." My voice echoed. My throat was dry, and my hands trembled. I spotted the desk in a small alcove. The open manuscript still lay there, but now it was on a different page. I leaned in, adjusting the lantern. The notes in the margin said, "They feed on knowledge. They do not want to kill. They want a mind to open the path." Another line read, "The books record everything that enters. Don't let them record you." I rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of confusion. I turned more pages, looking for an explanation of how to leave. The original text was illegible to me. The notes in English jumped around, mentioning shifting hallways and living corridors. One line caught my attention. The reason it was sealed, it grew too large. People got lost. We locked it to stop more wandering souls. My heart pounded. I realized I might be trapped here if I didn't figure out how to reverse whatever is powering this place. Then I found a final note that said, "Find the original seal in the main corridor. Break the power by closing the circle and reversing the wards." I had no idea what wards meant in a literal sense, but it was the only clue I had. I lifted the manuscript, deciding to carry it with me so I could consult the notes. As I did, I heard a scratching on the floor behind me. I swung around, raising the lantern. I saw a shape near the edge of the light. It was low to the ground, maybe the size of a large cat. I couldn't make out details, my eyes strained. Then it scuttled away, and I heard the scrape of claws on stone. My heart hammered. I felt a rush of cold sweat across my shoulders, clutching the manuscript to my chest. I headed back into the corridor. I kept glancing behind me. My steps echoed, and my breathing was ragged. I forced myself to keep moving. After a while, I came to a wide hallway that looked more structured than the twisting paths. The floor was made of evenly cut stones, and the ceiling had a row of hanging lanterns all unlit. I saw a symbol etched into the floor, a circle with strange markings around its edge. It was about 2 feet across. I knelt down, carefully placing my lantern beside it. The manuscript mentioned something about closing the circle. I looked at the circle and the wards around it. They seemed like old runes or letters I couldn't identify. Following the notes, I tried to replicate what they described. I used a piece of chalk from my pocket, something I normally carry for labeling boxes in the archives. I traced the outer ring, noticing it was incomplete on one side. The chalk lines had to connect to form a full loop. My hands shook as I drew. I breathed slowly, telling myself to stay focused. Once I connected the circle, I placed my hand on it. Nothing happened at first. Then I felt a faint vibration in the floor. The circle glowed for a split second. Or maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks. A low rumble moved through the walls. I stood up, my heart racing. The hallway shifted. I saw the stones in the walls move like sliding panels. A new opening appeared to my right. My lantern flickered, but I grabbed it and kept moving. Inside, I saw a short tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, there was a set of stone steps leading up. A faint draft of fresher air hit me. I moved quickly, almost stumbling in my rush. The steps were worn, and the air was cooler as I ascended. When I reached the top, I saw a wooden door. My palms were sweaty, but I pushed on it, and it opened into the same storage room I'd started in. The hidden door clicked shut behind me as soon as I stepped out. I turned around to see if it was still visible, but the wall looked solid again, no seam, no crack. I dropped onto a nearby stool, panting. My clothes stuck to my skin. My heart pounded so hard that my chest hurt. I set the manuscript on a table and stared at it under the dim overhead light. The cover was worn, and the strange script shimmered slightly. Part of me wanted to throw it back inside, but I knew I couldn't. Someone else would eventually discover that library and face the same nightmare. I needed to protect them from it. My plan was to lock the door from the outside, but there was no visible latch or keyhole. So, I covered the entire area with heavy boxes and old shelving units, hoping to hide it. Then I left the storage room and headed straight for the head librarian's office. I felt the cold sweat drying on my body as I walked. My thoughts were jumbled, but I knew one thing. That hidden library wasn't normal. It wasn't just a room with books. It was something bigger, something that changed the space around it. Something that made me question everything I knew about the university. Even though I escaped, I could still feel the presence behind the walls. I heard faint whispers in my mind like the echo of that voice calling my name. My hands trembled and I wiped them on my pants. I hoped never to set foot in that library again. That's my story. I found a hidden door and stumbled into a library that shouldn't exist. The books there move on their own and the corridors shift, forcing you deeper. There's something crawling in the darkness, calling out in a voice that shouldn't be. I only got out because I followed clues in a strange manuscript and sealed something I don't fully understand. Now, I just want to forget the smell of damp stone and old paper. I want to forget the feeling of pages turning by themselves, but I can't forget because every time I'm alone in the archives, I feel a cold breeze, and sometimes I swear I hear my name whispered from behind the walls. I still remember how my legs tensed up the first time I realized something was off in that underground parking garage. I was heading to my car late, like usual, and I felt this deep pressure in my chest. I'm used to working long hours, but I'm not used to feeling that kind of weight on my body. My neck felt stiff, and my fingers shook while I pressed the button on my car key. I heard the distant echo of a car engine from another level, but I didn't see anyone else around. That was the start of everything. I didn't talk to anyone about it at first. I thought maybe I was just tired or stressed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was lurking down there. I work in an office tower downtown. The building has a few underground parking levels. They're dimly lit with long rows of concrete columns and lines of empty parking spaces. It's never cheerful down there, but for a while I just assumed it was my own mind playing tricks on me.
I get out of the elevator, hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, and see my reflection in car windows.
My breathing would speed up a bit, and I'd sometimes grip my keyring too hard, but I always told myself it was fine. I told myself I was being paranoid. One evening I had to stay past midnight. A client needed documents, and I was stuck with the revisions. By the time I was done, I was the only person left on the floor. The hallway lights were on a timer, and they kept turning off, leaving me with those emergency lights along the baseboards. My eyes felt heavy. My back was sore from sitting at my desk. I decided to pack up and head home. I took the elevator down to the parking levels. When the doors opened, I realized the lights were flickering more than usual. They'd flicker sometimes, but not in a long, steady pattern. That night they kept pulsing on and off. The floor looked damp, and I noticed a light sheen on the concrete. I assumed maybe a pipe had burst. I smelled something stale in the air, kind of like stagnant water, but I couldn't identify it. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me, stepped out, and started walking toward my car. As I moved between the rows, I heard this faint scraping sound. I stopped and looked around. Nothing moved. No one was there. I tried to ignore it and kept going. Then I heard it again, a little louder. It was like something hard scratching against the concrete, or maybe against the wall. My shoulders tensed and I gritted my teeth. I aimed my key fob at my car to unlock it and heard the usual beep. Then the scraping stopped. The flickering lights hummed overhead. I got in my car and locked the doors right away. My hands were shaking and I had this knot in my stomach. I started the engine and the headlights lit up the row in front of me. I noticed a dark shape move behind one of the columns. My heart pounded in my chest. I thought I was seeing things, so I blinked a few times, but I swear I saw some figure slipping out of sight. I waited a few seconds, but I didn't see it again. I reversed out of my space, not taking my eyes off the columns. The shape didn't reappear. I left the garage feeling uneasy. The next few nights, I tried to leave earlier, but I still ended up working late. The same unsettling tension filled the air when I went down to the parking garage. I started to notice scratch marks on the concrete walls near the elevator doors. They looked shallow, like thin grooves in the surface. Sometimes I saw wet footprints on the floor in places that didn't make sense. They'd stop abruptly, leading nowhere. I heard distant breathing a couple of times, like someone gasping after a sprint, but I never saw anyone else around. I kept telling myself it was just normal building noises or weird condensation, but I didn't really believe that. After a week or so, I decided to do a little digging. I looked up the building's history online. It took some effort because the place changed owners a few times. Eventually, I found a handful of articles mentioning odd incidents during the construction phase. Workers had reported strange sightings in the subterranean levels. One article mentioned a rumored creature that some people claimed to have glimpsed near the support beams. The piece was full of speculation, so I didn't know if it was some urban legend or if there was any truth to it. But after what I'd experienced, I couldn't dismiss it completely. The next time I went down to the garage, I had this surge of adrenaline the moment I stepped off the elevator. The overhead lights buzzed. The air felt colder than usual. My arms prickled with goosebumps. I held my phone in my hand, ready to use its flashlight if necessary. I walked slowly, scanning every row of parked cars. I heard that faint scraping again. My chest felt tight and my breath grew shallow. I tried to steady myself by focusing on my steps. My shoes made a dull echo on the concrete. As I reached my car, I saw a new set of scratch marks on the door to the janitorial closet. They looked fresh, with little flakes of paint on the ground beneath them. The lines were uneven, like they'd been made by something with a single sharp point. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach and unlocked my car. That's when I saw a dark shape in the corner of my eye. It moved quickly behind another row of vehicles. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I held my breath, waited, but everything went quiet. I got in my car, locked it, and left as fast as I could. This went on like this for a while. Each time I had to stay late, I'd noticed some new evidence of something living in that garage. Sometimes there were deep gashes in the concrete walls. Sometimes I'd find damp footprints or puddles that seemed to appear out of nowhere. One night I even found a piece of fabric snagged on a protruding piece of metal near a column. It was dark, stiff, but I couldn't tell what kind of material it was. I started wondering if I was dealing with an actual creature, or some person who was lurking around for reasons I couldn't understand. I decided to talk to a coworker named Carlos. He'd been at the company longer than me, and had mentioned once that he'd seen a security guard quit suddenly after working the graveyard shift. I asked him if he knew anything about the parking garage. He gave me a look that told me he'd heard the rumors too. He said he'd never seen anything himself, but he'd heard about strange noises. He also said a few people refused to park down there after dark. I thanked him for the info and tried to get back to work, but my mind couldn't let it go. One night, I planned to gather more evidence. I brought a small digital camera with me and decided to walk around the perimeter of the parking level before going to my car. It was late, so the place was mostly empty except for a few cars scattered around. I kept the camera in my hand, ready to record if I saw or heard anything unusual. I started near the elevator bank. The lights were still flickering in that slow, irritating pattern. My footsteps echoed around me. The air felt stale, and my throat felt dry. I saw more scratch marks along a low wall that bordered a row of parking spaces. I leaned closer to examine them. They looked deep, and the edges of each scratch felt rough to the touch. I turned on the camera and recorded a short clip describing what I saw in a low voice. Then I moved toward the far side of the garage, where there was a small fenced-off area that stored maintenance equipment. As I approached, I heard this heavy breathing. It sounded damp and uneven, like someone struggling to get enough air. My pulse raced, and my hands felt sweaty. I raised my camera, but I didn't see anything through the small screen. I took a few more steps. Then in the corner near a support column, I saw a shifting shape. It was hard to make out in the dim light. I pointed the camera in that direction, but the shape moved behind the column. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but I could hear my heart pumping in my ears. I stepped closer, thinking maybe I could capture some proof. My knees felt stiff, and each step felt heavier. When I reached the column, I flicked on the camera's flashlight. I didn't see anyone. I heard a scraping noise behind me, and spun around. My light caught a glimpse of something near the floor, but it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't know what it was. It looked bulky, and I thought I saw a hint of a limb dragging along the concrete. The shock rattled through my body. My muscles tightened. I backed away and bumped into a metal cart. The sound echoed and I cringed. I shone the flashlight around, but the shape was gone. I ran back toward my car, trying not to trip over my own feet. My breath came in short bursts, and my chest hurt. When I reached my car, I dropped the camera while fumbling for my keys. The camera clattered to the ground, and I cursed under my breath. I snatched it up, unlocked the door, and got in. I started the engine, locked the doors, and immediately drove up the spiral ramp. I felt my body tingling from head to toe. I glanced in the rearview mirror and thought I saw a movement near the elevator bank, but I couldn't be sure. I focused on the exit until I finally got out onto the street. At home, I tried to review the footage on my computer. My hands were still trembling while I inserted the memory card. Most of the video showed the dark corners of the garage, and my own shaky flashlight beam. The audio picked up the sound of my breathing and some faint scraping noises, but I didn't see a clear image of the creature. All I had were a few frames of a dark blur near the floor, half hidden by the shadows. It wasn't enough to show anyone as proof. Over the next few days, I felt tired. I had trouble sleeping, and I kept thinking about that shape I saw. My co-workers noticed I looked drained. I avoided talking about it because I knew most people wouldn't believe me. I thought about parking in a nearby lot instead of using the underground garage, but I couldn't afford that expense. I also didn't want to give in to fear. Part of me wanted to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was a raccoon or a large cat that got trapped in the building's lower levels. But the scratch marks seemed too large for a small animal, and that heavy breathing didn't sound like any animal I'd heard before. One evening, I tried asking the night security guard if he'd ever seen anything unusual downstairs. He stared at me for a few seconds, then said he wasn't allowed to talk about it. That was all he'd say. He just suggested I ask the building manager if I had any concerns. I didn't bother. The manager had always brushed off my questions about the flickering lights and the musty smell. I doubted he'd say anything about a creature in the garage. I kept working late, and the tension never left. Every time I stepped out of the elevator, I felt my heart rate climb. I'd walk faster than usual, keeping my car keys in one hand, ready to unlock the door as soon as I got close. My hands felt clammy, and my throat stayed dry. Sometimes I'd hear that scraping noise. Other times I'd smell something rank, like wet fur or damp concrete. Here's the corrected text. Each time I'd look around and see nothing, but I could feel eyes on me. One night the light started flickering more intensely than before. I felt like I was trapped in a strobe effect. I heard a loud thump from the far side of the garage. Then I saw a shadow dart behind a truck. My whole body clenched and I froze in place. My mind screamed at me to move, get out, but my legs felt stiff. After a few seconds, I forced myself to hurry toward my car. I reached it and tried to slide the key into the lock, but my fingers were shaking so much that I dropped it. I heard that scraping sound getting closer. I grabbed the key off the ground and managed to open the door. I jumped in, started the engine, and sped off. My heart hammered in my chest the whole drive home. That was a week ago. I haven't seen the creature up close, but I've sensed it. The marks in the garage have multiplied. Sometimes I see fresh scratches that look deeper and sharper than before. Sometimes I see prints that look like a mix of handprints and footprints, but smeared in a way that doesn't match a normal person. I've been thinking about switching jobs, or at least asking for a day shift, but I need the money, and I'm not sure if I can find something else easily. Each night I tell myself I'll just ignore it. I tell myself I'll park, keep my head down and move fast. But some nights I feel like I'm walking into a trap. The tension in my neck is constant. My shoulders ache from staying hunched. My eyes water from straining to see through dim, flickering light. I feel that presence behind me, like it's waiting for me to make a mistake, to linger too long in one spot. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's some wild animal, some abandoned experiment, or something else. I just know it's there, and I know I'm not imagining it. The scratches and footprints are real. The scraping noises and heavy breathing are real. The security guard's silence is real. The building's old stories are real. At least enough for me to believe them. This is my routine now. Every night I take the elevator down, my stomach tight. Every night I brace myself for that flicker of movement or the echo of scraping claws. Sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't, but the air still feels thick, and my nerves stay on edge. I can't say how long I can keep doing this. For now, I have no choice. I park there. I work the late shift, and I endure that sinking feeling every time I open my car door. I wish I had a neat conclusion. I wish I could say I confronted it or that it turned out to be a stray dog.
That hasn't happened.
All I have is the same fear every night, the same signs that it's still around, and the same unanswered questions. I just know something is alive in that underground parking lot, and it's watching me, waiting in the shadows, and I can feel its presence every time I step off that elevator. I moved in last month on a Tuesday. My car was still packed with cardboard boxes, and I remember feeling an odd heaviness as I stepped into the house for the first time. The place was old, and the previous owner left a lot of his stuff behind. There were a few pieces of furniture scattered around, but most of it was dusty and worn out. The attic was the last part of the house I visited, and from the moment I opened that squeaky wooden door in the ceiling, I felt something tense in the air. It wasn't a smell or a sound. It felt like standing too close to a static charged TV. My arms prickled with a light electrical buzz. It was subtle at first, but it grew every time I came back. I noticed right away that the attic was filled with boxes, trunks, old lamps, and cracked mirrors. There were stacks of newspapers tied together with twine. Some had yellowed pages. There were metal coat hangers and a few old suitcases. In one corner, I saw an old television set. It had a big rounded screen and thick dials on the front. There was no cable, no obvious power cord sticking out, yet it sat there like a relic from a different era. I didn't think much of it at first. I just felt a bit uneasy. Something about that TV looked off, like it didn't belong even among all this junk. On the third day, I decided to do a proper exploration of the attic. I carried a flashlight, because the single light bulb barely did anything. The dust was thick enough to choke me whenever I disturbed any boxes. I kept brushing it away from my face and blinking because my eyes started watering. I heard the floorboards under my feet creak and groan with each step. The attic felt like it was holding its breath. I'd never been a superstitious person, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was up there with me. I started rummaging through the boxes. Most were filled with random housewares. Plates, cups, spoons, forks, chipped bowls, and broken glass. Some boxes had old clothes that smelled moldy. I sneezed a lot. Then I found a trunk filled with old VHS tapes and a few film reels labeled with handwriting I couldn't read. I set them aside, thinking I might explore them later if I found something to play them on. Then I turned toward the television in the corner, which faced the wall, kind of angled toward a slanted part of the attic ceiling. It gave me the creeps because its screen reflected bits of light from my flashlight and made it look like it was glowing. I walked closer to it, put my hand on top, and it was cold to the touch. I tried to find a power cord but didn't see one. The back had a missing panel, and the inside looked dusty. There were wires, but they didn't seem connected to anything. I shrugged it off. I assumed it was just junk. Then I heard a faint crackling sound. At first I thought I was imagining it. It was this soft static noise like a TV left on a dead channel. But the TV was clearly off. I peered at the screen, but all I saw was my own reflection and some of the dim light from the flashlight. I backed away, feeling my throat tighten. Then the static went silent. I tried to brush it off. Maybe something in the attic was just faulty. Old electronics could do weird things. I spent a few more hours up there, sorting boxes, writing labels, trying to organize. I kept an eye on that television though. Every once in a while I thought I heard a low hum, but it was so faint I couldn't be sure. I felt a tingling on my neck, like a draft passed by, but I didn't see any open vents or windows. I left the attic after that. I didn't want to stay up there any longer. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the old TV. I sat up in bed, picturing the shape of it in the corner, covered in dust yet somehow alive. Around midnight, I heard a short burst of static upstairs. Just a single crackle, but it made my stomach flip. I turned on the lamp next to my bed and listened. My ears were tuned in for any noise, but everything went quiet again. I thought about going up there to check, but my legs felt numb. I couldn't bring myself to leave the comfort of my bedroom. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. The next day, I tried to ignore the attic and focus on unpacking the rest of the house. There was plenty to do. The kitchen was a mess, and the living room needed a complete cleaning. After a full day's work, I was sweaty and exhausted, so I took a shower, made a quick dinner, and tried to relax. But every time I glanced at the attic door in the hallway ceiling, I felt the same electric tension creeping over me. Around 10 p.m., I heard it again. That static crackle. It lasted a few seconds longer this time, almost like the TV was powering up. I froze by the sink and stared at the ceiling. I thought I was losing my mind. My heartbeat kicked up, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. Then it cut out just as suddenly as it started. I went to bed but couldn't settle down. I kept picturing that dark shape up there, and my own mind filled in details of weird shadows and flickers on the wall. I convinced myself to check the attic the following morning, just to prove it was my imagination. When I climbed the ladder and opened the attic door, everything looked normal. The boxes were the same. Nothing seemed out of place except for one thing. The TV was now facing a different direction. Instead of facing the wall, it was turned around, screen pointed toward the door. I stared at it for a good minute, trying to remember if I had moved it. I didn't think so. My pulse started racing, and the back of my neck felt clammy. I walked over and gently nudged the TV to see if it was loose on the floor. It wasn't. It was steady. It wouldn't just turn by itself. My stomach knotted up. I reached around to see if a cord had magically appeared, but there was nothing. That was when I saw a faint shadow on the wall behind it. It looked like a person's outline, but it was flickering. There was no one else in the attic, and it couldn't have been mine because of where I was standing. I noticed it only for a second, and when I moved the flashlight, it vanished. I left the attic immediately. My hands were shaking and my chest felt tight. I spent the rest of the day trying to think rationally. Maybe a draft pushed the TV, or maybe some reflection created that shadow. But I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. That evening I sat in my living room with the lights on. I tried watching a movie, but I couldn't focus. Around 11 I heard the static again. This time it sounded stronger. I stood up and felt my breath catch in my throat. The attic door was closed, but I could swear I saw a faint light shining through the cracks. It was like the flicker of a TV on a low channel. I felt my legs tremble. My instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, but my curiosity and fear drove me up the ladder. I pushed open the attic door. The room was darker than usual, but the TV screen was lit with pale static, even though it wasn't plugged in. I felt a jolt in my chest as I stared at that flickering image. It wasn't showing any station or channel, just swirling black and white noise. Then I noticed the shadow on the wall behind the TV. It looked like a person standing with their arms hanging at the sides. The figure was larger than I remembered. Its edges moved with the static, like it was breathing. I stayed at the top of the ladder, not daring to step fully inside. My heart pounded so hard that my hands started to go numb. As I watched, the shadow seemed to bend an arm toward me. I swallowed hard and my eyes burned from not blinking. I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the ladder. I flicked the light switch on the wall, but the attic bulb just flickered once and burned out. Total darkness. All I had was the glow from the static. I heard my own breathing echo in that cramped space. The shadow was still there, shifting with the static. I couldn't move, my knees locked and my muscles felt weak. Then I heard a sharp click from the TV. The static cut out for a moment, replaced by silence. The screen went black. I started to feel relief, but then it clicked back on, crackling louder than before. The shadow on the wall grew in size. It moved upward, like it was lifting itself. I gasped and scrambled down the ladder. I almost twisted my ankle on the way down. I slammed the attic door shut and ran to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, panting. My shirt was soaked in sweat. My mind was racing with pure panic. I stayed up the entire night, listening for any sign of more static. The silence was somehow worse. Over the next few days, I tried to avoid the attic. I kept busy with work and tried to spend as much time away from the house as I could. But every night, I heard those bursts of static. Sometimes I heard them just a few times, sometimes more. I felt like I was losing control. My hands would shake whenever I approached the attic ladder. My mouth went dry thinking about that shadow. I noticed each night it took on new positions. Once I heard the static and poked my head up just enough to see the screen from the top of the ladder. The shadow was leaning forward as if crouched. Another time it seemed to stretch across the wall like it was reaching for the boxes. It was never in the same spot or shape twice. The worst part was the sense that if I looked at that TV too long, something would happen. The screen's static wasn't just random noise. Sometimes I saw shapes in it, like glimpses of buildings or old-fashioned rooms. It was never clear, always distorted, but every time I caught a hint of an image I felt a tug in my stomach, as if I was being pulled forward. My vision blurred, and my head felt light. I had to snap my eyes away before I lost my sense of where I was. Each time that happened, I felt more drained. My appetite sank and I started having trouble sleeping. One evening, I finally worked up the courage to get rid of the TV. I grabbed a big tarp from the garage and went upstairs. It was around 6 in the evening, still some sunlight outside, so the attic wasn't pitch black. The TV was there, silent, but I felt the usual tingling in the air. I spread the tarp on the floor, planning to wrap the TV and drag it out. As soon as I touched it, I heard a soft crackle from inside. My heart pounded. I lifted the TV a few inches, and it felt heavier than it should have for such an old piece of equipment. It slipped out of my grip, and the screen clattered against the floor. Suddenly the static popped on and I stumbled backward. I forced myself to grab it again, ignoring the static. My arms shook as I hauled it onto the tarp. The picture hissed and flickered. The shadow on the wall jumped and twitched. My neck felt hot, and a cold sweat ran down my spine. I pulled the tarp around the set, trying to cover the screen, but the static glow seeped through. When I turned to look at the wall, the shadow had grown larger. Its head shape was tilted as if it were watching me. My heart hammered so hard I felt dizzy. I dragged the wrapped TV across the attic floor toward the ladder. Every inch was a fight. The TV felt stuck to the floor sometimes, like it didn't want to move. The static got louder with each pull. My ears rang, and my eyes burned from the dust I kicked up. By the time I reached the ladder, I realized I couldn't carry it down alone. It was too heavy and awkward. I considered pushing it through the opening, but I was worried about damaging the ladder or getting stuck halfway. My arms trembled with exhaustion. I stared at the attic door and cursed under my breath. That was when the static suddenly went silent. I froze. I looked over at the tarp, and the TV was still. The shadow was gone from the wall. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. My heart was pounding so loudly that I heard it in my ears. I realized it might be dangerous to force the TV down the ladder in this state, so I unwrapped it and set it back in a corner. I felt a surge of frustration because I couldn't remove it right then. I hated leaving it there, but I couldn't see an easy way to do it by myself. I ended up going downstairs, shutting the attic door, and locking it with a small latch. It felt ridiculous to lock the door, but I needed any small sense of security I could get. That night I heard the static behind the attic door, but it was quieter. I still felt uneasy. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next burst. My brain wouldn't shut off. My pulse stayed high. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that shadow changing positions, moving around the boxes, and creeping across the walls. My mouth went dry whenever I thought about those flickers of old images on the screen. Sometimes I convinced myself that if I went back up there and stared into the static, I might be pulled into whatever strange place was inside that swirling noise. I haven't looked into the TV screen for more than a few seconds at a time, and I intend to keep it that way. I'm still figuring out how to get rid of it safely. I might ask a friend to help me haul it out and take it to a dump. Until then, I keep that attic door locked. Some nights the static is loud, almost like it's calling me. Other nights it's just a faint hum, but I know it's there, and I know the shadow is too. I can feel that same electric tension in the air whenever I walk under the attic. My skin prickles, and I feel short of breath. I have no idea where this thing came from, or why it's messing with me. I only know that it's not just some broken TV, it's something else, and it wants me to look deeper into that screen. I'm doing everything I can to resist. Until I figure out how to remove it, I have to live with that unblinking static-filled presence up there in the attic. And every night I wonder if the shadow has moved again. I noticed a stale smell the moment I stepped into the smaller exhibition hall. It felt thick in my lungs, like the air had been sitting still for a while. I moved from painting to painting, searching for something that would spark a new idea for my own work. I'd seen plenty of landscapes and portraits, but none of them stood out. My eyes felt tired. The lighting in the room was dim, and there were only a few people wandering around. The place felt quiet, except for the occasional echo of footsteps on the polished floor. After a few minutes, I saw an odd painting hanging on a far wall. It was larger than the others, maybe 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall. The frame was a dark wooden design, but it looked old and had some chipped spots at the corners. I took a few steps closer and caught a whiff of mold. It wasn't strong, but it triggered an immediate sense of unease. I leaned in to see if the surface looked damaged by moisture. Instead, I saw a strange sheen on the paint like it hadn't dried. The texture seemed soft and wet. I didn't touch it right away, but I could tell something was off. The guard stationed near the entrance seemed bored. He was flipping through a small booklet and didn't pay much attention to me. I decided to stand there, looking at the painting a bit longer because I felt an odd pull. The image showed a dark scene, possibly a room with broken furniture. It was hard to tell what exactly was inside that room, but I noticed warped shapes and what might have been a door in the background. The brushstrokes looked thick. The paint had a glossy shine under the weak lights. I reached out with one finger very carefully and grazed the surface. It felt tacky, and a tiny bit of red paint smeared onto my fingertip. I wiped it on my pant leg without thinking. The smell of mold grew a little sharper. It was like the painting had some kind of moisture trapped in it. I wanted to ask someone about it, so I looked around for a curator or a staff member who might know more. I only found a part-time worker near the main desk who didn't seem very familiar with the pieces. He gave me a short explanation. The painting came from a private collection, and it was set to be auctioned the following day. He shrugged when I asked about the wet paint. I felt frustrated, but I kept staring at the piece. The artist's name didn't recognize me on the small placard underneath it. It looked like a smeared signature, G. Torrance, or maybe G. Torrance. Hard to read. The next day, I showed up for the auction. I told myself I'd just watch and see how much it would go for. But part of me wanted to bid. There weren't many people there, and the painting appeared near the end of the list. The bidding started low. Nobody seemed interested. The auctioneer described the piece in a dry monotone. I decided to raise my paddle, thinking I'd at least test the waters. A few seconds passed. No one else raised the paddle. The hammer went down. I won it for a price that felt surprisingly cheap. A staff member congratulated me and handed me a payment form. I signed it, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and dread. I asked about the painting's condition, but they said there was no official record of any damage or odd qualities. I asked if they noticed the paint was still wet, and they just shrugged. Nobody had any information. I arranged for the painting to be delivered to my apartment the next day. My place isn't very big, but I have a corner set up as a little atelier, with my easel and brushes and tubes of paint all over the place. I cleared a spot on the wall opposite my main work table. When the delivery guys brought the painting, I noticed the smell right away. They wrinkled their noses and one of them said it smelled moldy, but they left it at that. I tipped them, shut the door, and just stood there with this large painting leaning against the wall, still wrapped in brown paper. I unwrapped it carefully. The frame had that same old look, with some fresh scratches from transport. When I placed my hand near the surface, I felt cold air, like the painting radiated a chill. I decided to hang it on the wall. As I lifted it, I felt a thin drip of something wet slide down and touch my wrist. I flinched. The liquid was cold, and it made me shiver. I pulled away, checked the back of the painting, and saw a small damp spot on the canvas. It felt slimy. I used a rag to wipe it off and then hung the painting. That night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. I don't remember any dreams, but I sat up feeling uneasy. My heart was beating hard. My room was dark, except for the faint glow of a streetlight through the curtains. I listened for any sounds. Nothing but a distant car outside. My atelier is right next to the bedroom, and I could smell something. It was the musty odor of the painting. It seemed stronger now. I got out of bed and walked into the studio area. The painting was still on the wall, but when I turned on the overhead light, I saw fresh streaks of red on the floor underneath. A few drops had splattered. I knelt down and touched a drop. It was wet paint. My stomach clenched. I cleaned it up with a rag, but I felt uneasy. I looked at the painting and noticed a new detail in the corner. Something that looked like a figure crouched in the shadows of that broken room. I didn't remember seeing that shape before. I blamed my tired eyes and decided to go back to bed. In the morning, I woke up late, around 9. I walked into my atelier with a cup of coffee. The smell almost made me gag. It was damp and unpleasant like rotten wood. I opened a window for fresh air. Then I looked at the painting again. Now there was a figure at the center, right in the middle of the painting. It wore what looked like a dark coat, and its face seemed blurry, as if someone had smeared the paint while it was wet. My first thought was that someone had broken in and vandalized the painting. But there were no signs of forced entry. and my door was locked. Also, it looked too detailed to be random vandalism. The figure had a certain posture. I leaned in close, realizing the coat looked eerily similar to one I used to wear years ago. I could see cracks in the paint where it had dried in some spots, but the fresh details glistened in the daylight. I felt my heartbeat thudding in my chest. I wanted to touch the wet spots, but I felt nervous. I ran my finger along the side, and sure enough, the paint was damp. It came off on my fingertip. The drop had a dark red hue. It reminded me of thickened oil paint that hadn't fully set. My skin crawled. I walked to my phone and tried to call the gallery, but nobody picked up. I left a message asking if they had sold me a damaged piece. My voice cracked a bit. I hated how that sounded, but I couldn't help it. Over the next few days, the painting changed more. Each morning, new details showed up. Broken furniture pieces became clearer, and the figure in the center seemed to inch closer to the foreground. My atelier felt colder. The damp smell lingered in every corner. I tried covering the painting with a cloth, but the cloth got stained overnight with wet paint. Every time I touched it, the cold, slimy texture made my stomach churn. I even checked the walls around the painting and found small smudges of paint. I wiped them off, but by the next day they returned, spreading across the plaster like a faint rash. One afternoon, while I was painting my own piece, I heard a soft drip. It was the sound of liquid hitting the plastic cover on the floor. I turned around and saw dark paint dripping from the lower edge of the mysterious canvas. It looked thicker than before, almost like tar. The smell was overpowering. I tried to clean it up with a rag, but it smeared across the floor and stained my hands. I tried soap and water, but the stain clung to my skin for hours. I felt panicked, like the paint was burrowing into my pores. I started noticing that the painting scene looked a bit like a twisted version of one of my old studios. The furniture arrangement was similar to one I had years ago, and the walls had the same cracks that used to run through the place I rented back then. The figure wore a dark coat I once had, the one I threw out after it got ruined in heavy rain. My mouth went dry each time I realized these connections. I couldn't explain how a painting from someone I didn't know showed details of my life. At night, I had trouble sleeping. I heard faint sounds like someone knocking inside the walls. I turned on the lights and walked around, but I never found anything. My atelier felt suffocating. The air was damp, and the corners of the room looked darker, as if the paint had seeped into the walls. I tried to ignore it, but every morning I woke up to more smudges on the walls. Tiny streaks of paint ran along the baseboards. I wiped them away, but they always came back. One night, I heard a sharp tapping sound from the painting itself. I got out of bed, flicked on the light, and stared at the canvas. The surface seemed to pulse. I took a step closer. The figure in the painting had moved. It was now in the foreground, staring out from the canvas. The face was still smeared, but I saw hints of features that reminded me of my own face. My chest tightened. I swallowed hard and looked away. I grabbed a hammer, pulled the painting off the wall, and carried it to the corner. I was done letting it hang there. I considered throwing it out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Something about it made me freeze whenever I tried. That night the smell spread to my bedroom. It was in my clothes and my sheets, even in my hair. I took a shower, scrubbing my skin until it felt raw, but the odor lingered. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My thoughts were jumbled. I kept thinking about the painting's wet surface, the changes in the images, the figure that looked like me. The sense of violation kept growing, like something was creeping into my personal space. The next morning, I found paint stains on the outside of the cloth I'd thrown over the painting. The paint had seeped through and formed shapes on the cloth. I pulled the cover off and saw new elements in the painting. A set of shelves with scattered brushes and tubes of paint. I recognized them as items from my current atelier. It felt like the painting was documenting my life, but in a warped, unsettling way. My throat felt tight and I broke into a cold sweat. I tried contacting the auction house again. No answer. I emailed the museum. They sent a generic reply saying they had no record of any unusual condition. I felt alone with this growing problem. I decided to move the painting into my living room, away from my work area. I covered the walls of my living room with plastic sheets. I set up a fan to help clear the smell, but it barely made a difference. The painting still dripped. Every time I checked it, more details appeared. A cracked window that looked just like one in my bedroom, stains on the floor resembling those in my hallway. It was tracking my world piece by piece. At one point, I stood there staring at the painting and felt dizzy. My palms were sweaty. I heard a faint squishing sound behind me. I turned and saw a trail of wet paint creeping along the wall from the atelier doorway. The paint had a dark color, somewhere between brown and black, and looked thick. I tried to wipe it up, but it just smeared and made the smell worse. My eyes watered. My hands shook. My heart thumped in my ears. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in. I struggled to breathe through my mouth to avoid inhaling that rancid odor. Later that evening, I tried to paint one of my own canvases, hoping it would distract me. But I couldn't concentrate. My attention kept drifting to the living room, where the wet painting sat in the corner, dripping. My body felt tense, and every small noise made me flinch. The loose floorboard creaked, and I jumped. I stared at the door, expecting to see more paint seeping in. When I finally went to check on it, I saw that the painting had changed again. The figure was no longer inside the broken room. Instead, it stood in what looked like my current apartment, near the living room window. The background showed plastic sheets pinned to the walls. I felt my knees weaken. That was my setup right now. I could even see the reflection of my own easel in the background. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The moldy odor made me cough. I spent the rest of the night in my bedroom, door locked, lights on. I heard dripping noises, a soft tapping, and occasionally a wet squelch, like something thick was sliding across the floor. I tried to ignore it, but the tension knotted my shoulders and made my muscles ache. By the time morning came, I was exhausted. My eyes were red, and I had a throbbing headache. I opened the door and found smears of paint stretching from the living room into the hallway. The floor felt sticky under my bare feet. I gagged at the stench. When I finally stepped into the living room, I saw that the painting now showed a figure standing right at the edge of the canvas, with a hand reaching out. It was coated in wet paint. Pitlift, streaks across the surface. It looked like an invitation or a threat. My stomach churned. I approached it slowly. The paint on the frame was slick, and droplets fell to the floor in steady intervals. My breathing grew shallow. I was afraid to touch it, but I didn't know what else to do. I stood there trembling. My skin was coated in a cold sweat. I could feel my heart hammering as I tried to figure out my next step. My apartment was cluttered with plastic sheets and stained rags. My eyes stung from the smell of mold and paint. I knew I couldn't live with this painting any longer. I had to get it out, or I had to leave. I felt like the walls were bending inward, closing me off from fresh air and sunlight. The painting seemed alive, an extension of something I couldn't understand. I took one last look at the figure's smeared face. It resembled me. I saw the shape of my jaw, the slope of my nose, and the coat I had long ago. My mind was a wreck. My nerves felt shredded. I had to escape that room. I dropped the rag on the floor, turned and stumbled out into the hallway. I left the door open, letting the cold draft sweep through. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew I couldn't stay there. My only thought was to find a place without that smell, without those dripping sounds, without that creeping paint that followed me everywhere. I left the painting behind for a moment, but I knew it wasn't over. I could still smell it on my clothes, and I could still feel the chill on my skin. I still remember how the fog felt on my skin that night. It clung to my arms and made my hair feel damp and heavy. I was standing near the old fountain in the center of the square, trying to figure out which route would get me home the fastest. I had stayed out later than usual, hoping to avoid the weekend crowds in this tourist town. People come here all the time, searching for the older parts of the city with their hidden alleys and guest stories. I never believed in any of that. But then I spotted the man in old-fashioned clothes. He was standing under a broken streetlight, looking around like he was lost. I noticed his suit right away because it looked like something from a vintage photograph. His jacket was dark, with wide lapels. His pants were slightly baggy. His shoes had a strange shine, as if they'd been polished in a different way. I felt a slight chill, but told myself it was just the weather. I walked closer to him, thinking maybe he was a reenactor or performer who'd gotten separated from his group. He asked me for directions. His voice was soft but firm, and he used words that seemed out of place. "Excuse me, sir. I'm trying to find the corner of Raven Street and Marlborough Lane." The way he pronounced those street names sounded wrong. "I live in the city. I know its main roads, side alleys, and the place he was describing didn't exist on any map I'd ever seen. I told him I didn't recognize those names. He looked at me as if he didn't believe me. Then he pointed toward the east end of town, behind a row of tall buildings that had once been factories in the early 90s. I felt uneasy. I tried to stay polite, so I said something like, "I can walk you part of the way if you want." He nodded once, and we started walking together. The fog was thick, making the streetlights look dim. I heard the sound of dripping water from gutters. My shoes splashed a bit in puddles. I glanced at the man's feet. He stepped in the same puddles but left no trace of moisture when he moved on. I thought maybe I was seeing it wrong because of the fog, but I looked again and there was nothing. No splatter, no shiny spot on the concrete, where his foot should have left water. It made me feel a knot in my stomach. He walked in a straight line, keeping pace with me. I couldn't hear his footsteps. The only sounds I caught were my own breathing and the low buzz of a neon sign in a store window. I tried to make small talk, asking if he was visiting. He said he'd been around for a short time but needed to head home soon. I asked where he was staying, but he didn't give me a direct answer. He just said, "I need to reach that intersection before the hour is up." I checked my phone for the time. It was close to midnight. The battery was low and the screen flickered for a second. I got a brief chill in my arms. As we continued, I noticed the storefronts looked older. The signs were weathered in a way I hadn't seen before. One store I passed every week looked like it had changed overnight. The letters on the sign were in an older font and the paint was peeling. I tried to ignore it. I told myself the fog can make things look different, but my heart was racing. My palms felt sweaty. I tried not to make it obvious. We reached a narrow street that ended in a tall gate. It was locked. That gate had always been open before. People used that alley as a shortcut to the main square. Now it looked like it hadn't been used in years. Rust and chains covered the latch. The man stared at it for a moment, then turned to me without blinking. His eyes looked too clear, like water reflecting moonlight. I stepped back. I felt a sudden urge to leave. He said, "It's closed now." His voice sounded distant. I nodded but said nothing. I decided I'd better take a different route and point him in the direction of the old industrial area, hoping to get away from him. I turned around for a second, and when I glanced back, he was already behind me, standing too close. I felt his breath on my neck, though it wasn't warm. I almost jumped. He said nothing. I forced a cough and walked on. For the next few blocks, I sensed him near me, but couldn't see him each time I turned my head. I felt tension in my shoulders. My neck felt stiff. My heart was beating faster than normal. I kept telling myself this was ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned onto the main street, hoping to see some late-night drivers or a security guard. The street was empty. The fog made the streetlights glow orange, giving everything a dull haze. When I reached my apartment, I fumbled with my keys. I looked around and didn't see him. I let out a shaky breath and rushed inside. The walls felt cold, and the lights flickered for a second. I locked the door behind me. My heart was pounding. I went straight to my desk and tried to look up Raven Street and Marlborough Lane on my laptop. Nothing came up except an old reference in a local history forum. It mentioned a defunct neighborhood that existed decades ago, back when the city was just starting to build factories. The post was incomplete and had no pictures. It only consisted of rumors about an abandoned district with a strange reputation. One user mentioned a lost tourist who appeared on foggy nights asking for directions to that place. I read every word, feeling my chest tighten. I looked for more clues but found only vague posts about sightings of a man in outdated clothes. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I felt tired and restless. I went out to a local archive in the older side of town. It's a small building that keeps records, newspapers and documents from the city's past. Inside, the light was fluorescent, and the smell was like damp paper. I asked the clerk if they had any references to that old neighborhood. The clerk gave me a skeptical look but showed me a box of files from early city planning. I flipped through them and found a short note about a street named Raven. It was part of a development that got shut down because of financial issues. There was nothing about Marlborough Lane. I kept digging, and I found a newspaper clipping from around that time. It mentioned an unusual disappearance. A visitor from out of town had vanished, leaving his belongings behind in a local inn. No official resolution was ever recorded. After that, the references stopped. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. My hands trembled a bit. I thought about the man's polished shoes and how he asked for directions. I felt a growing sense of dread. I hurried out of the archive and stepped into daylight. People passed by me, talking and looking at their phones. Cars rolled by at normal speeds, but I still felt jumpy. I kept expecting to see him standing across the street or leaning against a lamppost. Later, I went back home, made some coffee, and tried to calm down. That night, I stayed in, closed the blinds, and watched some TV with the volume low. But I couldn't relax. I felt like I was being watched. Around midnight, I looked out the window. The fog was back, thicker than ever. Streetlights looked weak. I stared at the building across from mine. There was a shadow on the sidewalk that looked tall and still. My heart pounded. I stepped away from the window, afraid to keep looking. The next morning, I decided to walk around during the day. Maybe if I saw the normal city in sunlight, I'd convince myself it was all just an overreaction. The air was clear, no fog. People walked around with cameras, taking pictures of historic sites. I felt a bit better. I strolled into a local bookstore that specialized in regional legends. The shelves were packed with paperbacks about ghosts, haunted mansions, and strange events. The store owner noticed me looking at one shelf and asked if I needed help. I told him I was curious about any stories involving a wandering tourist from another time. He raised an eyebrow. Then he pulled out a worn booklet from behind the counter. It didn't have a proper cover. It looked homemade. He said it contained collected accounts from various witnesses who claimed they had encountered a mysterious traveler at night. The pages described sightings that matched my experience. An old-style suit, polite speech, and an odd request for directions to places that no longer existed. I read about how some people felt like reality shifted around them when he was near. Buildings looked different. Street signs changed. One witness wrote that they saw an old clock tower appear where a modern structure usually stood. Another person described a sudden glimpse of gaslit street lamps instead of electric ones. My stomach twisted again. I remembered how the locked gate had looked covered in rust, as if abandoned for a long time. I had never seen it in that condition before. The store owner asked if I was okay. I nodded and put the booklet down. I left without buying anything because I felt too uneasy. That night, I tried to stay indoors again. I locked my windows and placed a chair under the doorknob. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise. It sounded like dripping water in my living room. My eyes snapped open. The room was dark and I heard my pulse thudding in my ears. I got up and turned on the lights. Nothing was there, but I still heard the drip sound. I followed it to the front door. A cold draft touched my face. My door wasn't locked anymore. It stood open by an inch. I slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt. My heart was pounding. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself I must have forgotten to lock it fully. But my hands were shaking, and I felt a chill run down my arms. I walked around, checking every corner. No one was inside, but I felt like I wasn't alone. The following day, I made up my mind to confront this. I grabbed a flashlight, wore a thick coat, and walked into the older part of the city around midnight. The fog rolled in again, soft and thick, muffling the sounds of cars and footsteps. I moved slowly, checking side alleys. The streetlights buzzed, and my breath felt heavy. Then, I saw him. He was at the end of a narrow street, standing near a crumbling wall. I stepped closer, keeping the flashlight pointed at the ground in front of me. My footsteps echoed. He stared at me with those clear eyes, unblinking. He told me in a calm voice that he still needed directions. He asked again for Raven Street and Marlborough Lane. I told him I didn't have an answer, but I asked him what time he thought it was. He pulled out a watch. The casing looked tarnished. He said it was nearly midnight, but I looked at my phone, and it was almost 1 a.m. I felt the tension in my chest. He held the watch up so I could see. The second hand wasn't moving like normal. Instead, it clicked back and forth in a short loop. I turned around and I saw the buildings flicker. For a second, it looked like I was standing on an older street. The signs changed to older designs. The windows were shuttered, and I heard distant horse hooves on cobblestones. I shook my head. I felt nauseous. My flashlight dimmed, and when I looked back, the man was closer. I stepped back, pointing the flashlight at him. The beam flickered. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. He reached out his hand as if inviting me to join him. I felt panic tighten my chest. I backed away. He moved closer, silent. I pointed the flashlight at his face. but the light didn't seem to hit him the same way it would hit a normal person. His eyes didn't reflect the light, they stayed dull. I turned and started running. I heard my own footsteps in the pounding of my heart. The fog thickened, and I lost my sense of direction. The houses around me shifted in appearance. Some looked modern, others looked decayed and abandoned. Every few steps I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was always just in my peripheral vision, always at the same distance away. I gasped for air. My mouth was dry, my legs shaking. I kept moving until I stumbled onto the main street. A single car passed by, headlights glaring through the fog. I blinked and looked around. The architecture was back to normal. There was no sign of him. I stood there for a moment, hunched over, trying to catch my breath. My knees felt weak. I finally made it home. I locked my door carefully, checked it 3 times, and drank some water. My hands were still shaking. I realized this wasn't over. The next day, I tried to act normal. I even went out to buy groceries, but every time I entered a quiet street, I looked around for him. At work, I felt distracted. I made small mistakes. I couldn't concentrate. My boss asked if I was sick. I just said I was tired. That night, I sat at my desk, reading old accounts again, trying to figure out what to do. Some people claimed you had to ignore him until he faded away. Others said you needed to leave town for a while so the connection would break. I wasn't sure if any of that was real. I decided to pack a bag. I needed to get away from this place at least for a few days. I couldn't stay if he kept appearing. My stomach churned at the thought of him dragging me into that other time. I thought about those brief flashes of old storefronts and rusted gates. It felt like the city was folding in on itself, blending the past and present. I didn't know what would happen if I stayed in that state for too long. I had no interest in finding out. Right now, I'm zipping up my bag. It's almost midnight, and the fog is here again. I hear a faint tap on my window. I turn off the lights and sit still, holding my breath. I can see him from where I am, but feel him nearby. My chest feels tight, and my heart is racing. I wipe sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. I'm leaving in the morning. I'm driving as far as I can. I'll stay with a friend in another city. Maybe after some time passes, I'll come back. Or maybe I won't. Either way, I'm not letting him drag me into his world. Not tonight. Not ever. I'm going to leave this place and hope the fog doesn't follow me. If it does, I don't know what else I can do. But I'll try anything to keep myself in my own time, in my own reality. That's all I can do right now. I arrived at the old palisade on a rainy afternoon, feeling a chill that crawled along my arms and settled in my chest. I was there for research, hoping to examine the architecture and collect stories about the building's past. I'd heard rumors about strange happenings, but I only had a few facts to cling to. When I walked inside, the guide nodded at me without smiling. He was an older man with a tight jacket and tired eyes. He spoke quickly about the main hall, the upper floors, and the locked basements. Then his voice got lower. He pointed toward the far end of a dim hallway and said, "That's where the corridor of broken mirrors is. We don't go there unless we have to." He left it at that. I followed him around the main rooms, taking notes on my phone. The palisade felt damp, and the light bulbs in the corridors flickered from time to time. Every so often I glanced at the door that led to this corridor I'd heard about. Eventually he took me there. The place had a musty smell, like old wood and stale air. When I saw the corridor for the first time, I felt my stomach tighten. The walls were lined with mirrors of various sizes. All of them were cracked or shattered. I saw large diagonal breaks, spider webs of broken glass and dark frames with missing pieces. Shards crunched under my shoes when I stepped closer. He said, "Nobody cleans it up. Nobody replaces them. People who worked on them in the past said they felt something wrong. They refused to come back after the first attempt. We just leave them as they are." He gestured for me to step back, and he clicked off the light at the far end. The corridor got darker, and I saw my reflection in one of the less broken mirrors. My face looked older than I remembered. I asked why they didn't fix it. The guide shrugged. "They say these mirrors hold something in. I don't know what that means. I'm not superstitious, but it's not my job to find out." Then he left me alone to explore. I stayed there, shining my flashlight over the broken glass. I noticed that several cracks joined together in a pattern that almost looked intentional. The lines seemed to curve around each other in short arcs, linking different mirrors. It reminded me of old runes, I'd seen in dusty manuscripts, but I couldn't make out any words. I felt uneasy. I checked my phone for a signal, but there was none. The corridor made me feel like I was under observation. My skin felt cold, and I rubbed my hands together to ease the tension. For the rest of the afternoon, I toured the palisade, took photos of the ceilings, doorways, and old paintings in the main hall. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to return to that corridor. Something about it called to me. I asked the guide a few more questions, but he didn't give me much. He only said that workers had tried to remove the mirrors decades ago and gave up. He hinted they might be afraid of freeing something. I laughed it off in front of him, but I kept replaying his words in my mind. After dinner, I went to my small room on the second floor. The staff told me not to wander at night, but I couldn't let it go. I decided to check the corridor alone. They turned off the main lights, leaving only a few emergency lamps near staircases. The building felt deserted. My footsteps echoed on the old floorboards. My heart pounded with each step. I listened for any noise, but everything was quiet except for the occasional drip of water from somewhere above. I made my way to the lower level. I had a cheap flashlight in my pocket. I clicked it on and pointed it down the corridor. The reflection of the beam jumped across the shattered surfaces. The corridor was silent except for the slight hum of old electrical wiring. I walked slowly, keeping my eyes on my reflection. At first I only saw myself in the broken surfaces. My hair looked messy from the humidity, and my jacket hung awkwardly on my shoulders. I tried to breathe calmly. As I got halfway down, I noticed something strange. One of my reflections moved a little slower than I did, and then another reflection seemed to move faster, like it was getting ahead of me. I stood still and raised my right hand to see if I was just imagining things. Most of the reflections followed my movement, but the one in the far left mirror raised its hand a moment too soon and it looked off. That version of me had a twisted expression on its face, like it was angry or disgusted. My chest tightened, and I took a step back. I heard a soft scraping sound. I aimed my flashlight along the floor. I saw that some loose shards were shifting slightly. The corridor had no draft, so I couldn't figure out why they were moving. My pulse hammered in my ears. I glanced at the row of mirrors again. A few of my reflections had normal expressions, but some didn't match. One looked terrified, with wide eyes and an open mouth, but I wasn't standing there with my mouth open. Another reflection pressed a hand to the glass as if trying to push through. Its eyes locked on mine. My hand started shaking. I tried to tell myself I was seeing things. Maybe it was the angle or the cracks or some trick of the light. But a part of me knew that wasn't true. I stepped toward the mirror with the reflection that looked terrified. My reflection stared right back at me, even though my actual face was calm, except for a slight tremor in my lips. I reached out with my real hand, wanting to touch the mirror surface. My fingertips were a few inches away when I heard a faint creak from the ceiling. Something about that sound made me pause. Then I felt a slight vibration under my feet. I stumbled back, and the reflection in the glass changed. It now had an expression of rage, as if it were furious that I had pulled back. My throat felt dry. I swallowed hard and stepped away. The corridor felt narrower. My breathing was ragged. I looked at the cracks. They formed spirals and jagged lines that connected each mirror to the next. In the dim beam of my flashlight, these lines seemed to glow faintly. I could see them pulsing almost like they had a heartbeat. They formed shapes that looked like strange letters. I heard a dull thump inside my ears, matching that faint pulse. My temples began to ache. The air smelled heavier, like old dust, and something metallic. I reached up and touched my forehead, feeling a bit of sweat. My senses were on high alert. I turned around to see if the exit was still clear. It was, but it felt farther away than before. I pressed forward, deciding to leave, but my curiosity wouldn't let me. I took a few steps back toward the start of the corridor and glanced at my phone. The time read a little after midnight. No messages, no signal. The quietness of the palisade made every small noise stand out. A slight click from behind me made me spin around, shining the flashlight towards one of the largest mirrors. That mirror was shaped like a tall rectangle, almost a full-body mirror. It was cracked in a dozen places, with 2 large pieces missing near the bottom. My reflection there looked normal at first. Then it turned its head to the side while I was still facing forward. That movement didn't match me at all. My stomach lurched and I froze. The reflection's eyes glared at me. Its lips parted, but I heard no voice. I couldn't look away. I saw a faint twitch in the reflection's jaw as if it were trying to speak or scream. I felt my knees weaken, and I had to brace myself against the wall. The glass made a soft popping sound like more cracks were forming. I heard it again. That slight crunch under my shoes told me I was stepping on more shards that had shifted. The reflection kept staring, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I walked faster back toward the entrance of the corridor, but the flashlight flickered. The corridor plunged into near darkness. In that moment, I felt a cold gust of air brush past my neck, but I couldn't tell where it came from. My heart pounded. I tried to shake the flashlight to get it working again. When the beam returned, I saw several reflections along the row of mirrors. Each one had a different expression. Some looked as if they were screaming in pain. Others looked furious with clenched teeth, and a few had their eyes rolled back. I felt pressure building in my chest. I wanted to run, but some part of me told me not to panic. I slowed my breathing, took short steps, and tried to stay focused on my surroundings. I could almost hear a faint rustling sound, like something was brushing up against the inside of the mirrors. I turned around once more to check the largest mirror. It was flickering, as if a distant light were behind it. I walked closer, my feet unsteady. As I got near, I saw that the cracks formed a symbol in the center of the glass, 2 intersecting circles with a line across them. The line pulsed with a dull red glow. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks, but it felt real. I reached out to touch the surface. My fingertip brushed one of the cracks, and I felt a slight sting, like a static shock. I jerked my hand back and saw a small red mark on my skin. That was enough for me. I stepped away and started walking quickly toward the exit, but the corridor felt too long. I counted the mirrors as I passed. 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10. Each mirror had a broken reflection of me, each one out of sync. My stomach churned, and I forced my legs to keep going. My breathing was shallow. I tried to keep the flashlight pointed forward, but it kept jittering from how badly my hand was shaking. I heard more scraping sounds behind me, like something was sliding across the floor. I refused to look back. I wanted to get out, close the door, and never return. My head throbbed, and my eyes burned from staring into the flashlight's beam in that darkness. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my focus. Finally, I reached the door. I glanced over my shoulder at the corridor. The reflections were still there, but some had vanished into the dark corners of the shattered mirrors. I felt a chill race up my spine. Then I pushed through the door and slammed it shut. I stood in the hallway with my back against the closed door. My chest rose and fell with every panting breath. I could still feel a slight throbbing in my ears, like I was hearing that weird pulsing symbol from the other side of the door. The palisade was silent. No one else was around. I stayed like that for a full minute, waiting for my heart to slow. When I finally moved, I locked the door from the outside with a small latch. It didn't seem like much, but it gave me a bit of comfort. Back in my room, I sat down on the bed. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I placed the flashlight on the nightstand and tried to catch my breath. I thought about what I had seen, reflections that didn't match my movements, faces contorted in rage or terror, cracks glowing with some strange energy. I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the sweat at my temples. My clothes were damp. I stared at the wall, noticing that my vision was still a little blurry at the edges. I didn't think I could sleep, but exhaustion pulled at me. Eventually, I rested my head on the pillow. In the morning, I woke up with a stiff neck and a headache. My hands still tingled. I left my room and found the guide near the front entrance. I asked him if there was another key to that corridor. He said there was only one. I told him I had locked it. He shrugged and said we can open it again if we really need to, but usually no one goes there. He didn't ask me why. He didn't seem to care. Maybe he'd heard the same questions before. I spent the rest of the day in the palisade, but I avoided that end of the building. I tried to focus on my research. I looked at old documents in the library, scanning pages for clues about the corridor. I found references to renovations done years ago, but nothing that explained why the mirrors were left that way. Every so often, I felt a sudden wave of unease, as if the memory of the night before was crawling back. I'd remember those silent reflections glaring at me. My stomach would tighten and my palms would sweat. I packed my things by late afternoon. I planned on leaving before dark. I had more research to do, but I decided I'd prefer to do it from a safe distance, maybe in a local archive or library. The staff didn't ask many questions when I said I was leaving. They were polite, but distant. I felt like an outsider who had stepped into a place where I didn't belong. While I waited for my ride, I walked around the garden trying to let the fresh air calm me. But the memory of that corridor stayed fresh in my mind. I heard the car horn near the front gate, and I carried my bag out. When I turned for one last look at the palisade, I saw something in the second-story window. It looked like a reflection or a shape, but it disappeared fast. I got in the car without mentioning it to the driver. As we pulled away, I felt a rush of relief, but I also felt tense. I had left the corridor behind me, but the images were still there, stuck in my head. That's all I can say about my time in that place. I'm a historian and have seen old ruins, abandoned sites, and all sorts of strange corners of the world. But nothing ever got under my skin like that corridor of broken mirrors. I keep thinking about those reflections that were so out of sync, the expressions that didn't match my face, and the cracks forming symbols that seemed alive. Sometimes late at night I close my eyes and see those mirrors. I feel that same pulsing dread. I open my eyes fast just to remind myself that I'm not trapped there. I don't know if I'll ever go back. Some part of me wants to, just to confront whatever was happening in there. But every time I consider it, I remember the fear in my chest, the sweat on my forehead, and the sense that something on the other side of the glass wanted to break through. For now, I'll stick to my files and documents. I'll try to learn more from a distance. I'm not ready to face those broken mirrors again. They can stay cracked, silent and untouched, keeping whatever they hold inside, and I'm fine with that. I woke up that morning with a tight feeling in my chest, like my lungs were already preparing for the thin air up there. My gear was laid out next to me in the tent. I couldn't see much through the heavy fog outside, but I felt restless. I had planned this trip for months, and I wasn't about to turn back because of a little mist. I was at the base of one of the least explored mountains in the region. People said it was haunted or that it hid something nobody understood. I wasn't sure if I believed any of that, but I liked the idea of being the only one foolish enough to try. I packed my things quickly. The temperature was low, and my gloves felt stiff as I pulled them on. My breath came out in short puffs. I drank some water, forced down an energy bar, and started climbing around dawn. The slopes were steep, but I moved with caution. The fog clung to everything, and I could barely see a few feet ahead. Every few steps, I tested my footing, made sure my boots had a good grip, and then pushed myself higher. The air grew thinner, and my lungs burned a bit more with each hour. At one point, I stopped and looked down. The drop was huge, and my heartbeat grew faster. I reminded myself to stay calm and keep going. My arms shook a little from the cold, and my throat felt dry. I looked at the rope coiled around my shoulders. I had my ice axe, my spikes, and a small pack with some supplies. The plan was to reach the top before nightfall. I didn't want to risk an unplanned overnight stay on a mountain that was famous for sudden storms and heavy mist. By midday the clouds thickened. The sky turned dark, even though it wasn't late afternoon yet. The wind picked up, and I struggled to keep my balance. The snow whipped across my face. My goggles fogged up, so I wiped them with my sleeve. I pushed on, feeling the sting in my cheeks. The slope got icier, and my boots slipped a few times. But I managed to hold on. I kept hearing a faint rumble like distant thunder. Then, without warning, a blizzard slammed into the mountainside. The wind howled, and I couldn't see anything around me. I crawled behind a large boulder for some shelter. The cold bit through my jacket. My teeth chattered, and my face went numb. I stayed like that for what felt like an hour, maybe more. When the wind finally died down a little, I realized I had to find a better place to hide. I looked up and saw a shape in the distance. It looked like a small structure at the top of a ridge. I remembered the rumors about a cabin. People talked about a cabin near the summit that never froze. That sounded like a myth, but I had nothing to lose. I headed in that direction, taking slow, careful steps. As I got closer, the blizzard eased off like the storm was pulling back. That was strange, but I was too cold to care about explanations. The structure came into view. It was a cabin made of dark wood with a steep roof. Snow piled around the sides, but it didn't seem to stick to the walls. There was a single door. No smoke came from anywhere. The windows looked intact, but it was hard to see inside. I reached the door, gave it a gentle push, and it opened without resistance. I stepped in, and a rush of warmth hit me. It felt like a strong heater was running. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it. letting the heat soak into my numb hands. My jacket started to drip, melt water onto the floor. I saw a fireplace, but there were no logs inside. The walls themselves gave off heat. My first thought was that maybe there was some kind of generator, but I didn't hear any machinery. The inside looked well kept. Furniture stood neatly arranged. A small wooden table with 2 chairs sat near one corner, and a few shelves lined the walls holding books and objects I couldn't identify right away. The cabin had a single main room with a door to what looked like a storage closet in the back. Everything felt preserved as if someone had been there recently, but I saw no footprints on the floor, no scattered gear or signs of a caretaker. I set down my pack and rubbed my hands together. My heart rate slowed a bit, and the warmth made me want to sit down. My boots squeaked on the wooden floor. I took off my gloves and touched the wall. It felt slightly hot, almost like a radiator. That made no sense. I walked around checking the corners. I heard a low thumping sound from below the floorboards. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like a knock that came and went every few seconds. I looked at the ceiling. There were long scratches across the wood, which looked like claw marks. The shape and spacing suggested something with sharp nails had been up there. I frowned. It didn't look normal. The lines were deep, and the wood was chipped in places. I tried not to focus on that, but my mind wouldn't let it go. I felt my skin crawl. A few pieces of cloth hung from a rope near the fireplace. They looked torn and stained. There were strange symbols or letters drawn on them. I had never seen that kind of writing before. It wasn't in any language I recognized. The edges of the cloth strips were frayed, and some of the markings had bled into the fabric. I reached out to touch one, but then I heard the thumping again. It seemed louder. My stomach clenched. I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me. I glanced at the windows. Outside, I expected to see the swirling snow or the rocky slopes. Instead, I saw a busy street with cars and lights. It was nighttime in that view. I blinked and stepped closer. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion or dehydration, but the image stayed. I looked at another window, and I saw a dense forest with tall trees. The trees moved in a breeze, and I couldn't place where they might be. It definitely wasn't the mountain outside. I tried to open a window, but it wouldn't budge. The glass felt solid. I tapped it, expecting a normal response, but there was a weird echo. It sounded thick, like hitting a block of ice. I walked to the far corner where there was another window, and it showed a desert landscape with rolling dunes. I heard faint sounds of wind blowing, but it didn't match the conditions outside. The cabin was in some sort of strange connection with places I didn't recognize. My mouth went dry, and I felt my pulse hammering in my neck. I tried to stay calm, telling myself maybe these were screens or monitors designed to look like windows, but the scenes were too real. They weren't grainy and there was no pixelation. They looked like actual windows to other places. Then I heard the thumping beneath my feet again, stronger now, as if something was knocking against the floor from below. I grabbed my ice axe and held it by my side, my hand shaking a little, and sweat forming on my forehead even though the air was still cool enough to make me shiver. I took a few steps, following the sound. The floor in the center of the room was slightly discolored, as if water had leaked there at some point. I got down on my knees and pressed my ear against the wood. There was silence for a moment, then a single knock. My heart jumped, and I stood up fast, nearly losing my balance. I decided to check the storage closet, reaching for the doorknob and feeling the wood feel warm under my fingers. I opened it. Inside, I saw shelves with old canned goods and some tools. There was a small hatch on the floor, probably leading to a cellar or crawl space. I kneeled and lifted the hatch, and a rush of air came out, smelling musty mixed with something sour. I pointed my flashlight down, and I saw steps leading into darkness. The flashlight beam revealed dirt walls in a low ceiling. I couldn't see the end of the space. I climbed down, feeling the boards creak under my weight. Each step made a dull thud. At the bottom, I crouched and aimed the light in front of me. The space was narrow and the floor was damp soil. I moved a few feet forward and then stopped. The walls had the same claw marks I saw on the ceiling upstairs. Some were fresh, with splinters still attached. Others were older, covered in dust. I felt a chill spread through my entire body. There was another piece of cloth pinned to the dirt wall with what looked like an old knife. The cloth had those same strange symbols. I held my breath and reached out to touch it. The surface felt rough, The symbols were drawn in a dark substance that might have been ink. I heard a sudden scraping noise behind me, and I spun around, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. I didn't see anything move, but the noise continued, like something was dragging across the soil. My chest felt tight. I backed up, keeping the light aimed forward. The sound stopped, and I tried to steady my breathing. My face felt hot, and sweat rolled down my temples. I decided to get out of there fast. The place felt wrong. My instincts were screaming that I wasn't supposed to be there. I climbed back up the ladder, shut the hatch, and slid the closet door closed. My mind raced with questions, but I was more focused on the immediate need to get out. The windows still showed random places, a small cabin and a forest clearing, a modern cityscape, a hillside with green grass under a clear sky. None of those matched the blizzard outside. I looked at the front door. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I opened the door a crack and peered outside. The storm was still there, swirling snow over the mountain. I could see the ridge below, partially obscured by blowing flakes. The mist had thickened again. It looked dangerous. I felt the hot air from inside the cabin drift out, and the cold wind blew a burst of snow into my face. But that seemed less scary than whatever was going on inside. Before I stepped out, I heard the floor creaking behind me. I turned and saw that the main room looked darker. The walls still radiated warmth, but the light felt different. I glanced at the windows again. The scenes had shifted. One showed an empty hallway with stone walls. Another showed an open field with tall grass swaying in slow waves. Another showed a deserted alley with a single street lamp flickering. I heard a scraping sound along the ceiling. The scratch marks seemed deeper than before. I couldn't explain how that happened. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to speak out loud like I was trying to convince myself that I could handle it. "In leaving," I said, my voice echoing a bit in the silent room. I didn't wait for a response. I knew nothing there would answer me with words. The pounding under the floor started up again, louder. I felt each knock vibrate through the boards. The doorknob felt cold in my hand even though the rest of the cabin was warm. I took one last look at the interior, the shelves, the torn cloths, the scratched ceiling. The air inside felt thick, like stepping into a room that had never been opened. My throat felt constricted. I could hear my own breathing, rapid and shallow. I backed out slowly, not wanting to turn my back on the room. Then I pulled the door shut behind me. Outside, the cold stung my face, and snow whipped around my legs. I stumbled a few feet away from the cabin, fighting the wind. I looked back. The building stood there, dark and silent, but still somehow giving off that faint glow. Snow didn't stick to the walls. Ice melted around the foundation. A circle of clear ground extended a few feet from each wall. I realized it might be more than just a warm cabin. It might be something else, something I didn't understand. I knew I had to descend the mountain, but the visibility was bad. I decided to move lower to find a safer spot. My limbs shook, not just from the cold, but from the tension I felt in every muscle. My pack felt heavier than before, even though nothing had changed in its contents. My mind kept flashing back to those windows. The idea of a cabin that looks out onto different places still makes my head spin. I found a small outcrop where I could take shelter. I hid there for a couple of hours while the storm calmed down. I kept glancing up at the ridge. Sometimes I swore I could see a faint glow from that direction, but it might have been my imagination. Eventually I decided it was safe enough to keep climbing down. The snow had eased a bit, and I could see the rocky path below. The entire time I was descending, I felt like something was following me. I couldn't shake the feeling. Every shift of snow or crack of ice made me jump. My heart pounded, and I kept telling myself to focus on my steps. I could picture the scratched ceiling, the torn fabrics, and the insane windows that looked out on strange places. Those steady knocks beneath the floor. When I got to the base, I set up camp in a spot that felt secure. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cabin in my mind. I kept seeing those unknown symbols on the cloth. My heart would race, and I'd sit up, breathing hard, trying to remind myself that I was outside again. The temperature felt normal down there. The snow was just snow, and the rocks were just rocks. But my brain kept drifting back to what I'd seen. I had gone to that mountain expecting a challenge. I found something else entirely. I don't know who built that cabin, or why it never freezes, or how those windows worked.
Oh, just glad I got out of there.
I still feel uneasy when I think about it. There's a part of me that wants to return one day and see if I imagined the whole thing. But another part of me knows I didn't imagine anything. I felt the heat from those walls. I heard the pounding under the floor. I saw the scratch marks and the strange fabrics. And I saw windows that opened to places that didn't match the mountain. Something is going on up there, and I wasn't prepared for it. I managed to leave the mountain with most of my gear. I never told the local guides exactly what I saw. Instead, I just said I ran into a storm and decided to turn back. They joked that I must have gotten spooked by some old legend. I never argued with them. It's easier to let them believe I chickened out. The truth is too weird to explain. Even now, I feel a knot in my stomach remembering the warmth of those walls and those faint knocks that kept echoing in that silent cabin. I haven't climbed that peak again. I don't think I ever will. Whatever is at the top of that mountain doesn't belong in our world, and I'm not interested in finding out where else it might lead. I still go on other climbs, but I pick places that feel normal. I pack a little more carefully and keep an eye out for sudden changes in the weather. But no matter how cautious I am, I can't shake the memory of standing in that strange cabin looking out windows that showed impossible scenes, listening to something under the floor that should not exist. Sometimes I wake up at night with my heart pounding, convinced I hear those knocks in the distance. Then I remind myself I'm not on that mountain, but that warm feeling on my skin, that thick silence in the air, and those claw marks on the ceiling. I don't think I'll ever forget them. I can still feel them in my bones, and I'm not sure I want to know what's hiding behind those windows or those scratched walls. I pushed open the crooked gate at my uncle's old farm and walked through the tall grass. My boots scraped against stones, buried in the dirt. I felt sweat gathering at my temples. The air smelled stale, like mold and damp wood. As I got closer to the house, I spotted the well on the right side of the yard. It was made of uneven stone and covered with dark green moss. The stones looked slick, and patches of dried leaves clung to the edges. I stopped and stared at it for a moment. My heart thumped harder than usual. I didn't remember much about this place I hadn't visited in years. Most of the wooden beams on the porch were warped or splintered, and some of the windows on the old house were cracked. But I couldn't stop looking at the well. Something about it got my attention right away. I walked over to it, curious but also uneasy. The damp smell rose up from the pit, mixing with the earthy odor of wet moss. I placed my hands on the rim, feeling the rough stone and the cold moisture seeping into my palms. I leaned forward. It was dark inside, but I could make out a faint reflection of light near the bottom. At first, I figured it was just water catching a bit of sunlight. Then I noticed it had a bluish tint. It reminded me of a weak glow stick, the kind that barely lights up a tent. I stared a little longer, and that's when I heard the whisper. It wasn't a gust of wind. It was a voice soft and low, like someone calling my name from a distance. My breath caught in my throat, and my skin tingled. I pulled back, unsure if I'd imagined it, but I could still hear it. Too quiet to make out real words, yet definitely there. I rubbed my arms and let out a sharp exhale. My first instinct was to leave, but part of me felt drawn to it. I stayed still for a few seconds. The voice stopped. I listened hard, trying to see if there was some sort of echo or trick of the wind. Then I heard it again, a muffled sound that seemed to say my name. It mentioned things I hadn't thought about in a long time. Old birthdays, details about the layout of my bedroom in the city, small secrets that barely anyone else would know. My pulse sped up. I pressed my palms against the rough stone rim and leaned in again. It was darker inside the well this time, as if the sun had shifted behind a cloud. The bluish glow was a bit stronger now, flickering in a weak rhythm, almost like a dying flashlight. The whisper turned into a hushed, desperate tone. It asked me to help. I couldn't tell if it was male or female, only that it was desperate. I pulled myself away again, breathing faster than normal. I glanced around the yard. Everything else was silent. Even the light wind in the trees seemed to fade. I decided to step back, walk toward the house, and try to ignore the voice. My throat felt tight, and I found myself swallowing hard, as if trying to get rid of a sour taste. I explored the house for a while, checking the rooms I used to see when I visited as a teenager. Furniture was covered in sheets. Dust floated in the beams of light coming through the windows, and the floors creaked under my weight. The place felt hollow. I couldn't focus on any of it, because the well kept coming back to my mind. I went back outside an hour later. I needed to see if the voice was just in my head. When I got there, I stood a few feet from the well. My hands were shaking slightly, so I clenched them into fists. The voice was silent at first. I walked closer, and then it came again, clearer this time. It seemed to say, "Please come down, help me." I leaned over the edge and strained my ears. I heard breathing as if someone was at the bottom, waiting. The glow looked a bit brighter, with a faint blue light dancing across the damp stones. My legs felt wobbly, and my heart pounded in my chest. I asked, "Who are you?" My voice came out shaky. There was no answer. I waited, feeling the breeze against my back. Then the voice whispered some detail about a jacket I used to wear in high school, mentioning a stain on the left sleeve. That detail was too random for anyone else to know. A surge of cold sweat prickled under my arms. I paced around the well, running my hand through my hair. That night, I stayed in one of the few rooms that still had a functioning bed. I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing that voice in my mind. Around midnight, I thought I heard it again outside, calling my name in that same low whisper. I sat upright, my chest tight, my ears straining, but the sound was gone. When morning came, I decided to go back to the well and get to the bottom of this. I found a sturdy rope in the shed. It was old, but looked strong enough to hold my weight. I looped it around one of the thick posts by the well, testing it a few times to make sure it wouldn't snap. Then I leaned over the edge, shining my flashlight down into the darkness. At first I saw nothing, just wet stone walls. The light reflected on some water about 20 feet below. That faint bluish glow was deeper, maybe another 5 feet under the water's surface. I tried to see if there was any shape or figure, but it was too murky. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed back in a distorted way. Then I heard the whisper again, closer, but still muffled. It repeated the same request. "Help me." I felt a surge of adrenaline. My skin prickled, and I noticed goosebumps on my arms. My gut twisted with a mix of fear and curiosity. I had to decide if I was actually going to climb down. I stepped away from the well for a few moments, my head spinning with possibilities. There was no clear reason to trust a whisper in a well, but it knew things about me. It felt impossible to ignore. My heart was pounding, and I could feel a dull ache in my stomach from tension. I took a few deep breaths and tied the rope around my waist, making a makeshift harness. My hands felt clammy, and my legs shook a bit. I carefully lowered myself over the rim. My boots scraped against the slimy stones. The smell of damp earth grew stronger, and drops of water splashed on my shoulders. A chill crawled up my back. I inched down, holding the rope tight, trying not to slip. A voice kept encouraging me. "You're doing good. Keep going. Almost there." It sounded so close, but I couldn't see anything except the reflection of my flashlight on the wet walls. When I reached the water level, I noticed a small ledge near the bottom. It stuck out about a foot from the wall. I planted my right boot on it and tried to get my balance. The water was dark and smelled stale. Little ripples spread out when I touched the surface with my flashlight. That's when I saw the bluish glow more clearly. It was underneath the water, flickering like an underwater lantern. The voice became louder, but still sounded like a whisper. It said, "I can't get out. I'm stuck." I felt my chest tighten. I aimed the flashlight at the water, but the beam only went so far. I couldn't see anybody or shape. My own breath sounded loud in my ears. My head throbbed from holding my breath too long between each movement. I took a quick inhale and exhale, trying to stay calm. The ledge was slippery, and I almost lost my footing. I asked, "How can I help you?" My voice cracked. There was a long pause. Then the voice whispered something about needing me to come closer. It said, "I can show you." My heart thudded. The idea of submerging myself in that cold, dark water made my mouth go dry. But the voice kept coaxing me, repeating personal details about my life. It mentioned the color of my first car, the name of an old friend I hadn't seen in years, and even a phrase I used to say when I was stressed out. Something about that knowledge felt invasive. The memory of those details made my scalp prickle. I realized I was dealing with something that wasn't just a random person trapped in a well. My stomach churned. I stared at the glowing spot under the water. I asked again who it was, but I got no answer, just another plea for help. I made my way back up the rope, my muscles straining. The further I climbed, the more I felt I was leaving something behind. The voice got quieter and quieter until I reached the top. I collapsed on the grass, breathing hard, my hands burning from gripping the rope. The rest of the day I couldn't focus on anything else. I found myself pacing around the farm, occasionally glancing at the well from a distance. It seemed to loom there, silent for now, but I knew it was waiting. The next morning I tried to ignore the well and spend time checking the rest of the property. I looked at the barn, peeked inside old sheds, tested some rusted tools, but my eyes kept drifting to that stone circle in the yard. Eventually I gave in. I walked over and stood at the edge. The voice started whispering immediately, as if it had sensed me coming. It was clearer now, almost like it was right behind me. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. I shone my flashlight down again, even though it was broad daylight. The glow under the water looked a little stronger than before. I felt a jolt of anxiety shoot through my chest. My heart hammered and my breath hitched. The voice asked me to lower a rope into the water. It said it needed me to guide it up. I asked it how that would work if it was submerged. There was no response, just that quiet, urgent request for help. I realized I was shaking my head trying to reason with myself out loud, but my words felt hollow. I was alone here. Nobody else would confirm or deny the existence of this whisper. The well was the only thing that seemed alive. I grabbed another rope from the shed, a thinner one. I tied a small piece of wood to one end so it would sink slowly. I fed it down into the water, watching the glow shift a bit. The voice murmured something about the rope not being enough. It needed me, physically, in the water. I felt a wave of nausea. My shirt clung to my skin, with sweat, and I could taste bitterness at the back of my mouth. I pulled the rope back up, trembling with confusion. Part of me wanted to run from the farm and never look back, but another part wanted to see what was down there. That night, I stayed awake in bed, my eyes on the ceiling. The house was quiet. I could hear my own pulse thudding in my ears. I thought about driving into town, but I felt trapped by my own curiosity. I imagined the water at the bottom of the well, that faint bluish glow, the voice that knew too much. My stomach tightened every time I pictured it. I caught myself gripping the sheets so hard my knuckles turned white. On the fourth day, I stepped outside early in the morning. Dew covered the grass and the sunlight was weak. The well looked almost ordinary in that light, except for the faint glow under the mossy stones. I approached it again, determined to get answers. My shoulders were tense, and I felt my jaw clenching. The voice greeted me instantly, sounding more urgent than ever. It insisted I come down again, this time with something to break the stones below the water. It claimed there was a passage or crack that led to a chamber. I found it hard to breathe. My hands felt cold, even though the day was warming up. I looked down, my flashlight beam bounced off the wet walls. I saw my reflection on the water's surface. My face looked pale, my eyes wide. The glow flickered underneath, drawing my attention to the center of the pool. My pulse pounded in my ears. The voice got louder, detailing personal memories from childhood, events that only a few people knew about. My eyes started to water, and I felt my heartbeat slam against my chest. I knelt at the edge, fighting the urge to climb down again. My hands shook as I gripped the flashlight. In that moment, I realized I might never get a straight answer from this thing in the well. It kept telling me it needed my help, but it never said why or who it really was. The tension in my chest grew, and I felt a dull, throbbing headache forming behind my eyes. I grabbed the rope and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to untie it, toss it in the shed, and leave the farm for good. But I just stood there, torn between wanting to help and not trusting the voice at all. I slowly backed away from the well. The voice followed me with whispers, calling my name, throwing more personal details at me. I heard them growing faint as I retreated toward the house. My breathing was shallow. My skin felt clammy, and my muscles ached from the tension. I stood at the doorway of the house, my chest heaving. I realized I had no easy way to explain any of this to anyone else. If I told someone, would they believe me? Would they think I was losing my mind? I turned around once more to face the well. The shape of the mossy stone stood out against the dull grass. I saw a small flicker of that blue glow from inside. Even though it was daytime, it reminded me that something was still down there waiting or pretending to wait. I felt stuck with my heart racing and my thoughts jumbled. But I also felt that if I left now, I'd never solve this. I'd never know what was calling me from the depths of that old stone pit. The whisper came again, faint but persistent. It asked me to return at night when the moon was up. It said that was the only time I could truly see it, or set it free. My stomach twisted and my heart thumped uncomfortably in my chest. I swallowed hard and blinked a few times, trying to steady my breathing. I nodded to myself, deciding I'd give it one last chance. If I went down there again and found nothing but cold water, I'd leave forever. But if I saw something real, I didn't finish that thought. Instead, I stepped inside the house and shut the door behind me. I rested my back against the wood, feeling my shoulders slump. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and I stared at the dusty floor. The voice was still whispering out there, probably waiting for me to answer. I closed my eyes and inhaled. I needed time to prepare myself for whatever was hiding in that pit. I felt my pulse slow just a little, but the tension in my chest never left. And so I waited, caught between fear and a strange pull I couldn't explain, listening to that whisper echo in my mind as the sun climbed higher over the abandoned farm. I still remember the first time I stepped into that museum at night. My shift started at 11 o'clock, and the place was already closed to visitors. The halls were empty, and the overhead lights were dimmed to save on electricity. I thought it would be easy money. Walk around every hour, check the exits, fill out a short log. I never expected anything unusual. Now I can't go through a single shift without feeling my stomach clench when I hear those footsteps echoing in the dark. I arrive at the museum security office just before 11. The head of security hands me the keys and a flashlight. He doesn't say much, simply pointing at a clipboard with the route I need to follow. I see a bunch of numbers, exhibit rooms, hallways, emergency doors. It looks straightforward. I nod, grab the clipboard, and wait for the clock to hit 11. The head of security wishes me luck, although his voice sounds flat and his expression never changes. I watch him walk out, and then I'm alone in a room that smells like old coffee and stale air. I start my first walkthrough. The museum is divided into themed sections, historical figures, folklore legends, and a few random pop culture icons. The curators say the wax figures are the most realistic in the country. I've never been fond of wax statues. They feel too lifelike, especially in low light. I wander through the hallway leading to the historical wing. My flashlight beam slides over the polished floor. The air is cool, and the silence is heavy. I hear my own footsteps, slow and steady. The walls carry an echo, making every step sound louder than it should. I move into the main hall. On my right, there's a statue of Abraham Lincoln. He's seated in a wooden chair, hands resting on his knees. I pause and shine my flashlight at his face. The detail is impressive. The wrinkles, the slight stubble, the hair. I walk a few steps forward and see Napoleon Bonaparte on my left. He's standing tall, wearing an old-fashioned military uniform. One hand is tucked under his coat. The statue's eyes seem to follow me. I feel my throat get dry. It's just the angle of the light, but it makes my skin prickle. I hear a click behind me. It's a soft noise, almost like a shoe tapping the floor. I spin around, shining my flashlight back toward Lincoln. The statue is still in its place, but I could swear it was angled differently when I first entered the room. I stare for a few seconds, feeling my heartbeat pick up. Then I shrug it off. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. Maybe the angle of the flashlight changed. I remind myself there are no visitors and the museum's doors are locked. I finish my first round without any more strange sounds. I sit back in the security office, fill out the log with the time, and note that everything seems normal. I try not to think about that little click I heard near Lincoln's statue. I check my phone for messages, sip some cold coffee from the pot in the corner, and wait for the next round. Around midnight, I walk out again. The building is quiet. The overhead lights are still dim, and the walls seem to stretch further at night. My footsteps sound heavier now, and I catch myself holding my breath. I pass by the historical figures again. Lincoln looks the same. Napoleon stands just like before, his stern face aimed forward. I notice a new detail. Cleopatra's statue is on a small platform to the left. She's lying in a regal pose. I point my flashlight at her face. Her eyes look glossy. For a moment, they seem wet. My chest feels tight. Then the overhead light flickers. The room goes dark, and I stop breathing for a second. I hold still, with my flashlight pointed at Cleopatra. In that instant of total darkness, I hear a soft breath near me. It's just one breath, quick and warm. The lights come back on, and everything is as it was. but now my arms are covered in goosebumps. I move on to the folklore section. This area is where they keep figures like mythical outlaws, rumored witches, and other mysterious characters. There's a statue of a rumored voodoo priestess, Marie Laveau, in the back corner. She's dressed in period clothing, staring forward with a faint smile. I don't like going near that statue. The details on her face are unsettling. I shine my flashlight on her. She looks calm. Her hands rest on her lap, and her head tilts slightly to the side. I feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up, as if something's watching me from behind. I turn around quickly, but there's nothing there. I keep going. I return to the security office, try to calm down, and take a few gulps of water. My mouth is dry. I keep hearing that breath in my head. I tell myself it's just the air conditioning or maybe a random hiss from the vents. But I know the difference between mechanical noises and an actual breath. My body feels tense and my heartbeat is faster than usual. I can't settle down. At 1 in the morning, I start the third round. I decide to walk a bit faster. I want to get it done. I step into the main hall, pass by Lincoln, and see that his head is turned a few degrees to the left. I stop walking. My heart feels like it's pounding against my ribs. I check the base of the statue. There's a little scuff mark on the floor, as if something scraped it. My hands shake a bit as I shine the flashlight around. I don't see footprints or anything else, just that small scratch on the floor. It doesn't make sense, and I stand there wondering if I should call someone. But who would I call? The police wouldn't believe me if I said a statue moved. I press on. The overhead light flickers again. The hallway is dark for maybe 2 seconds this time, long enough for my pulse to spike. I feel sweat on my forehead. Then the lights come back. Everything in the hallway looks normal, but my head is racing. I walk past Napoleon. He seems closer to the edge of his platform than usual. My flashlight trembles in my hand. I think about stepping back, but I force myself to keep going. I want to finish my route. When I reach the folklore area, I notice a slight shift in the positions of the statues. They're arranged in a semicircle, and normally each one faces the center. Now one is angled toward the entrance. It's a figure of a legendary pirate. I think it's supposed to be Blackbeard, but the label just says infamous buccaneer. He's holding a cutlass and his eyes have a piercing stare. I swear his head wasn't tilted before. My legs feel weak. I go straight to the next corridor without lingering. Back in the security office, I try to distract myself by digging through some old files. I see an envelope labeled Restoration Notes. I flip through the pages. There are references to some kind of ritual the original sculptor used, something about capturing the essence of wandering souls. It's all written in old handwriting, like someone tried to make notes in a hurry. I read a paragraph that says, "The figure's realism depends on the sacrifice of spiritual fragments." I don't know what it means, but it makes my skin crawl. Another page mentions that the wax was mixed with certain materials during a ceremony. The instructions talk about an incantation. I shut the folder because it's making my stomach churn. I stand up to start another round, but my knees feel shaky. I step into the hallway and decide I need to see if the statues are really moving, or if I'm losing my mind. I turn on my phone camera. I walk into the main hall and film Abraham Lincoln for a few seconds. Then I point my camera toward Napoleon. I capture Cleopatra. Everything stays still. I wait for the flicker of the overhead lights. It happens, and the hallway goes dark. My camera is still recording. In that instant, I hear a clear shuffle from the left. Then, a breath comes next to my ear. My heart thumps so hard that I gasp. The lights come back on, and I see that Cleopatra is no longer facing forward. Her head is turned to the left. Her chin is angled down like she's looking at the floor. I stare at her face, and I realize her expression has changed. Her lips are parted slightly, and her eyebrows look tense, like she's worried or in pain. I step back, shaking. My pulse feels out of control. I review the footage on my phone. In the darkness, there's a faint outline of movement, but the video is too blurry to confirm anything. I keep hearing that breath in the audio playback. It sounds close, like someone exhaling right into the microphone. I can't handle the silence anymore. I walk quickly back to the office, lock the door, and try to calm down. I open my laptop and search for anything related to the museum's history. Most articles talk about its founder, a sculptor who died years ago. They describe him as eccentric. They mention rumors that he believed in spiritual attachments. One article mentions a group of mediums who visited the museum decades ago. The mediums apparently said they felt strange presences around the statues. The article doesn't go into detail, but it's enough to make my skin prickle again. I force myself to do the next round because it's in my contract, and I don't want to lose this job. I tell myself that I just need to get through the night. I can reconsider in the morning. It's around 2:30 in the morning now, and the entire building feels colder than before. My breath feels tight in my chest. I walk, pointing my flashlight straight ahead, ignoring the flickering lights.
I passed Lincoln.
His eyes look slightly lower, almost as if he's staring at my feet. I keep walking. Napoleon's statue is now turned to the side, like it's pivoted. Cleopatra's face has that strained expression. I move into the folklore section. The pirate statue is leaning forward. The base is a few inches from where it should be. I see faint marks on the floor, like the base was dragged. My throat feels thick, and I swallow hard. Then I approach Marie Laveau's figure. She's the one I hate the most. The detail is so exact, right down to her fingernails. My flashlight flickers, and I realize my batteries are dying. The overhead lights don't help much because they keep dimming. I get close enough to see her face. Her eyes look different than before. Her lips are parted, and I notice what seems like the glint of teeth. I back away, feeling a chill run up my spine. My arms feel weak, and my hands are damp with sweat. The overhead lights flicker again, and for 2 or 3 seconds it's pure darkness. In that darkness I sense movement to my left. I hear a distinct shuffle against the floor, followed by a sharp click like something tapping on wood. My chest tightens. My breathing gets shallow. The lights come back on, and I see that Marie Laveau is no longer facing forward anymore. Her entire body is angled toward me, and her right arm is extended slightly. The distance between us is smaller. My heart feels like it's going to jump out of my chest. I don't scream. I just turn around and bolt for the main hall. When I reach the hall, I realize that the statues of Lincoln and Napoleon have shifted again. They're closer to each other, almost side by side. Their heads are turned in my direction. My stomach twists, and I run toward the security office. Once I get inside, I slam the door shut and lock it. I lean against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My heart rate is out of control, and my forehead is covered in sweat. I sit at the desk and stare at the small monitor that shows the security cameras. Most of the feeds are black and white. Some flicker because the lights are unstable. For a moment, I watch Cleopatra's exhibit. She doesn't move on the screen, but it's hard to see detail in that low-quality feed. I switch to the folklore wing camera. I see Marie Laveau's statue, just a faint silhouette in the corner. I keep staring, and then I notice a slight jerk in the image. I can tell if it's a glitch or if the statue actually moved. My heart pounds harder. I decide I can't hide in the office all night. The next round is if I skip it, I'll have to explain myself. I tell myself I'll do one more pass. That's it. I put fresh batteries in my flashlight. My palms feel sweaty, and I'm trembling a bit. The air in the office feels stale. I crack the door open and peer into the hallway. It's empty and quiet. I step out and walk slowly, flashlight pointed ahead. Every step feels heavy. I reach the main hall. Lincoln's statue is back in its original position. Napoleon stands where he should be, but their expressions look different. Both have a slight downward twist to their lips, like they're grimacing. I keep moving, not stopping. The overhead lights flicker off again, and this time the darkness lasts longer, maybe 4 or 5 seconds. I hear a quick scuffle of feet, and my chest tightens. I grip my flashlight and stay still. I feel a warm breath against my ear, and the hair on my arm stands up. The lights come back on, and the statues are all in place again, as if they've never moved. I move on to the folklore section, shining my flashlight around. My heart is pounding so hard that I feel it in my temples. I reach Marie Laveau's statue. She looks normal, sitting there with her hands on her lap. The faint smile is back. I exhale, trying to calm down. Then I realize there's a small scratch on her cheek, as if the wax got chipped. I look closer and notice something dark near the scratch. It looks like a tiny stain. I can tell what it is, but I get a wave of nausea just seeing it. I step back. I'm done. I rush back to the security office and stare at the clock on the wall. It's only 3. I still have a few hours left in my shift. I feel exhausted. My thoughts are jumbled. I wonder if I should just leave. But I don't want to get in trouble. So I sit in the chair. My eyes are glued to the camera feeds, waiting for time to pass. The lights flicker a couple more times, but I don't leave the office again. Every time the corridor goes dark, my heart spikes, and I grip the arms of the chair until my knuckles turn white. At 6 in the morning, the head of security returns. He finds me pale and shaking in the office. I don't say much, I just hand him the clipboard with my notes. I don't mention the footsteps or the moving statues. I don't talk about the breath on my neck or the changed expressions. I grab my stuff and walk out of there without looking back. As I step onto the street, I feel the morning air on my face. My limbs are stiff and my eyes burn. I take a deep breath and decide that I need to find another job. I know what I experienced in those halls, and I don't plan to see it again. I remember the first moment I spotted that old wind instrument. It was sitting on a wooden table in a crowded bazaar. The rest of the stalls had the usual junk. Old lampstands, dusty books, chipped dishes. But this piece caught my eye because of those strange patterns carved into its surface. They looked like spirals twisting around one another and reflected the sunlight in a dull, almost oily way. I felt a slight chill when I ran my fingertips along the surface. It felt cold even though the day was warm and humid. The vendor was busy haggling with someone else, so I just set a few bills down on the table and left with the instrument in my hand. I thought it might be a neat conversation piece for my street performances. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. When I got home, I placed the instrument on my kitchen counter. It had a thin metal mouthpiece and a body that looked like wood covered in faded bronze inlays. The arabesques were detailed but didn't form any pattern I recognized. I tried to see if there were any letters or writing hidden among the lines, but it looked more like random curls and loops. I thought about cleaning it, but I didn't want to damage the designs. I'm a street musician. I play guitar, sometimes harmonica, and I sing for tips on crowded sidewalks. I rarely mess around with wind instruments, but this thing fascinated me. I decided to practice with it in private first. That same afternoon, I pressed it to my lips and blew a few times. It made a weak sound like air passing through a narrow tube. It wasn't pleasant. I figured I just needed to find the right technique, but it seemed to resist me. I noticed the mouthpiece felt rough against my lips, almost abrasive. It left a strange metallic taste in my mouth, and I had to swish some water around just to get rid of it. That night, I left the instrument on top of a small cabinet in the living room and went to bed. The next morning, I felt a bit silly because I had dreamed about hearing a faint whistle echoing in my apartment. It sounded like someone trying to tune a flute in the corner of the room. I brushed it off. I assumed it was the usual random dream that follows you when you're thinking about a new musical toy. For a few days, I didn't touch the instrument much. I was busy with my usual routine, playing my guitar on different streets around the city. Sometimes I'd glance at the instrument before leaving the house, but I never took it out with me. It didn't feel right. It seemed incomplete or broken. I kept thinking about that rough mouthpiece and the weird taste. Toward late one night, around midnight, I got curious again. I was in my living room, awake, feeling restless. I turned on a small lamp, took the instrument from its spot, and sat on the couch. It was exactly 12:15 a.m. when I decided to give it another try. I placed the mouthpiece between my lips, inhaled through my nose, and blew as steadily as I could. At first, I heard just a soft hiss. Then I adjusted my tongue and tried a slightly different angle. That's when I produced a high-pitched note that made my teeth vibrate. The sound cut through the silence of the apartment like a sharp blade slicing through dense fabric. My ears started ringing, and I felt the hair on my arms rise. I stopped immediately, startled by how loud and shrill it was. The note kept echoing against the walls, bouncing from corner to corner, even after I took the instrument away from my mouth. It was like a delayed feedback loop that kept resonating, growing softer but still there. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, and my heart was pounding. That echo should have died out in a second or two, but I still heard it faintly hovering in the hallway. I set the instrument on the couch and walked toward the hallway entrance. I heard what sounded like a muffled wail. It didn't sound like a person. It was more like wind passing through a narrow gap in a window, except it had an almost sobbing tone. I leaned forward, looking into the darkness of the corridor, but I didn't see anything. My mouth felt dry, and I noticed a slight drip of sweat rolling down my temple. I flipped on the hallway light, but nothing was there. That night I placed the instrument in a storage trunk in my bedroom. I locked the trunk with a small padlock. I figured I'd just keep it out of sight and mind. I didn't sleep well. I dreamed of distant howling sounds, and every time I jolted awake I realized I was listening for that note again. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint whistling coming from the living room, but it stopped by the time I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. The following day, I felt drained, like I had barely slept. After I got back from playing guitar downtown, I noticed a weird chill in my apartment. The weather outside was still hot, but the inside of my place felt a few degrees cooler. I touched the walls in the hallway and sensed moisture. The paint felt slightly damp, and there were these small dark spots forming near the ceiling. They weren't big enough to see any shape, but it was unsettling. I opened a few windows to let some air in. I checked for leaks, but nothing looked obviously broken. By the time night fell, the temperature inside felt normal again. I remember pacing around my living room, not wanting to go to bed. Around midnight I heard it, that same piercing note followed by a hollow whistle echoing off the walls. My skin prickled and my breath caught in my throat. I rushed to my bedroom, unlocked the trunk, and found the instrument where I'd left it. It was cold to the touch, like it had been in a freezer. I ran my hand around the trunk, checking for a draft, but there was none. I lifted the instrument to my ear. I heard a faint hum like distant wind swirling. My chest felt tight. I put the instrument back inside, closed the trunk, and locked it again. The next morning, the hallway walls had more dark spots, and they seemed to form curved lines almost like the same spirals that were carved into the instrument. I touched them and my finger came away stained with a dark residue that smelled earthy, like wet soil. My stomach clenched, and I wiped my hand on a rag. I opened all the windows again and tried to air the place out. I wiped the walls down with hot water and soap, scrubbing until the stains disappeared, but when I stepped back, I still saw faint outlines. They were almost invisible, but I couldn't unsee them. I put on a fan and left the apartment, hoping everything would dry out and go back to normal. That day, I couldn't focus on my street performance. My mind kept going back to the bizarre events at home. My hands trembled on the guitar strings, and I kept missing chords. I only stayed out for a couple of hours before heading back. When I opened the front door, the apartment smelled stale and cold. I noticed water droplets on the hallway floor. The walls looked damp again and the stains had returned. They were darker now, forming loops and symbols that I couldn't ignore. They reminded me of shapes I'd seen in old illustrations of obscure rites or something like that, though I never studied that stuff in detail. That night, I made a mistake. I decided to confront the situation head-on. I took the instrument out of the trunk. It felt heavier than before. I carried it into the living room and placed it on the coffee table. I tried to keep the lights on so I wouldn't feel like I was walking into a horror movie scene, but the overhead bulb flickered a bit. It wasn't comforting. I sat across from the table and just stared at the instrument. My heart was racing, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. My arms felt clammy. I thought about blowing into it again just to see what would happen, but something in me resisted. My mouth felt dry and my jaw felt tight. Instead, I grabbed a small cloth and tried to examine the carvings. As I rubbed the cloth along the surface, I uncovered more intricate lines. Some spots looked chipped or worn, revealing what seemed like older markings underneath the top layer of designs. They were symbols, spirals, loops, and crescents, all overlapping. Suddenly my living room went silent, my refrigerator stopped humming, and the sound of traffic outside seemed to fade. I felt pressure in my ears as if I was in a soundproof booth. Then, a soft moaning tone started to rise in the room. It came from nowhere, but it was the same tone I heard that first night, the one that sounded like wind caught in a tunnel. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I got goosebumps all over my arms. My chest tightened, and my breathing turned shallow. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up, grabbed the instrument, and sprinted to my bedroom. I shoved it back into the trunk, locked it, then pushed the trunk into my closet. I threw an old blanket over it, but even then I heard that faint wail behind me, almost mocking. I slammed the closet door shut and rushed back to the living room. I turned on some random playlist on my phone just to drown out any lingering sounds. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I slept on the couch that night. I didn't rest well. Every little noise made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I heard water dripping. I got up to check the sink, but it was dry. The dripping sound continued, and I followed it to the hallway. The walls were wet again, and small rivulets of water trickled down in random patterns. Those patterns formed curves that looked just like the carvings on the instrument. I had to fight the urge to scream. My hands shook, and my stomach felt knotted. I grabbed towels from the bathroom and tried to soak up the moisture, but it just kept coming back, seeping through the paint. I kept wiping until my wrists started to ache. Eventually, I gave up and slumped to the floor. I stayed there listening to that faint dripping and the low whistle that seemed to be hiding in the corners of my apartment. The next morning, I called in sick to the spot where I usually perform. I had no energy to go outside. The environment in my apartment felt oppressive, like the air was heavy. It was humid and chilly at the same time, which didn't make sense. I decided to do some research. I looked up the type of instrument I had, searching for keywords like ancient wind instrument with carvings and ritual instrument with arabesques. I clicked on a few shady sites until I found references to older cultures that supposedly used special flutes or pipes to call on wind spirits. They mentioned how those who played them after midnight risked creating a bond with these unseen forces. The text said that once the bond was formed, the spirits demanded recognition. I felt a knot in my gut when I realized the shapes on my walls resembled images I found in those articles. They showed swirling lines that represented gusts of wind and arcs that symbolized gates or portals. One site suggested that people use such instruments in group ceremonies, standing in circles, chanting and playing them to harness storms. Another site claimed that these instruments fed on the player's breath and fear, growing stronger every time they were used. I tried to stay logical, but I felt panic crawling up my spine. My hands were getting clammy again. I walked to the closet, opened the trunk, and found the instrument was still there, silent. It looked duller than before, as if it had lost some of its luster, yet it felt like it was waiting for me. I slammed the trunk shut. I paced around my apartment, thinking of a plan. I wanted to get rid of it, but I worried it might make things worse. What if it made these forces angry? I felt ridiculous for thinking that, but my nerves were fried. The constant cold and dampness were wearing me down. That evening I wrapped the instrument in 2 thick towels and stuck it in a locked cabinet in the hallway. I was hoping that layering it away would keep it quiet. I went back to the living room and watched some TV, trying to stay distracted. Around midnight, I heard that same shrieking note blaring through the walls. It made my ears ring and my eyes water. It was sharper than before, and it felt like it was drilling into my skull. I jumped off the couch and ran to the cabinet. The door was still locked, but the inside rattled like something was trying to get out. I could see the door shaking and heard a faint scratching sound from within. I didn't dare open it. I backed away and grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, maybe a friend or neighbor, but I felt too embarrassed to explain. I just stood there, phone in hand, as this horrifying note kept echoing. The walls started sweating again. Moisture poured down in small streams, forming dark streaks that twisted into those cursed symbols. My breath came in short gasps, and my pulse throbbed in my temples. I felt a deep chill in my limbs. My legs were weak, and I sank to my knees. The note eventually faded, leaving a buzzing in my ears. I realized I couldn't let this go on. The apartment was getting warped by these forces. My possessions felt clammy. The floor was cold, and there was a damp smell everywhere. I decided to try taking the instrument far away, somewhere nobody would find it. The next morning, I grabbed the cabinet key and forced myself to open it. The instrument was still inside, wrapped in towels. I felt a wave of nausea just looking at it. My hands shook as I lifted it out. The metal mouthpiece felt even rougher, as if corroded by some reaction. I took a deep breath and stuffed the instrument into a thick garbage bag. I tied it shut and placed it in my old gym bag. I planned to drive out to a remote area outside the city. I didn't have a clear idea of what I'd do. Maybe I'd toss it in a river or bury it in the woods. I just needed it gone. The drive was tense. My knuckles turned white from gripping the steering wheel. I kept glancing at the gym bag on the passenger seat. Part of me expected the bag to move or make a noise, but it stayed still. I found a deserted field with some dense brush and pulled over on the shoulder. The air felt stagnant, and the sky was overcast. I could smell dirt and grass. I dug a shallow hole with a small folding shovel I'd brought. Every scrape of metal against the ground made my heart pound. My palms were sweaty. Finally, I placed the bag in the hole and kicked the dirt back over it. I stomped it down until I couldn't see any sign of a mound. Then I jogged back to my car and left. The entire ride home, I kept checking the rearview mirror. My pulse was fast, and my chest felt tight. When I got home, the apartment still felt cold and damp, but there was no new dripping. The walls still had those faint outlines, though they seemed lighter. They opened all the windows, turned on fans, and let the place air out. By nightfall, I didn't hear any strange notes or wailing. I slept on the couch again, clutching a flashlight. I woke up a few times listening for noises, but everything stayed quiet. As the days passed, the apartment gradually dried out. The temperature returned to normal, and the dark symbols on the walls faded enough that a fresh coat of paint would cover them. I still felt uneasy, but at least I could function again. I even managed to go back to my street performances, though I kept looking over my shoulder. Every so often I thought I heard a faint whistle in the distance, but it might have been the wind or a passing car. I don't know if I'm truly free of whatever that instrument carried. I feel a lingering tension in my muscles, and at night I sometimes wake up expecting to hear that terrible note. But as of now, my apartment is quiet and dry. I'm still on edge, waiting for some new sign that those spirits followed me. I haven't mentioned it to many people because I don't think they'd believe me. I just say I had some plumbing issues. It's easier that way. I won't forget the feeling of that cold, carved surface against my hands. I won't forget that sharp, piercing sound that echoed in my head for days. And I won't forget the wet walls and those swirling marks that seemed to creep out of nowhere. Part of me worries that something like this might happen again, but all I can do is keep living and hope I left that nightmare behind. For now, I'm grateful my walls are dry and my nights are quiet. I still feel a chill sometimes, but I can handle a little cold. At least it's better than listening to that awful wail in the dark.